Hey guys, welcome to part 6 of What If Naruto Became Serious During Chunin Exam. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 19. Book 2. Metamorphosis Part 2. He didn't know when he started on the path that he had chosen. He just knew that it had to happen at some point. Especially when the one who made him choose this path was the one who gave him his most humiliating beatdown ever since. Beast. Hyuga Neji gazed down to his hands where arcs of lightning crackled in different directions. He looked up. In front of him was the teacher of Team 7, aloof and reading his book. He had asked for advice on how to properly conduct the Raiden element. It was clear now that what he had been doing since his time fighting off Kidomaru that he still has little understanding concerning lightning chakra. What better way to understand Raiden than the one who had created a jutsu that can cleave lightning in two? So you've come to understand the use of lightning chakra with just a glance. No wonder the Hyuga consider you a prodigy. Talent like yours only appear once a generation. Kakashi had mused. Neji merely disregarded Kakashi's praise in favor of something else. Compared to your students, Kakashi-sensei, I am not at all that special. Kakashi deduced that Neji's change in attitude was in part due to the said boy's loss against his supposed worst student. My students are indeed something else. They carry with them the potential to become as great as or even greater than the Sannin. But they would not have gone this far if they didn't develop those mindsets all on their own. Conviction and confidence play a vital part in growth. There are those that believe that they can achieve greater heights, and often, they succeed out of sheer belief that they can. I think my students have been infected by Naruto's optimism, and in turn, your entire group as well. Neji merely focused more on his hands as he changed the nature of his chakra once more to electricity. What do you hope to achieve in learning Raiden? Kakashi asked all of a sudden. Neji was caught off guard and his concentration vanished with his Raiden chakra following suit. Neji looked at Kakashi, who was still looking at his book. But Neji knew well that the aloof Jonin was listening intently. To improve my ability to use Juken, to take it to even greater heights, and to enhance my ability to deliver faster and quicker strikes, that is my goal. Kakashi then looked up the Hyuga prodigy and said, I find it strange that for someone of your caliber in taijutsu to be adding elements to age-old traditions. And an element you're not even aligned with, no less. Why do you insist in using Raiden as your primary element? Neji gave Kakashi an answer he had almost come to expect from the boy. Because I want to defy destiny, to become lightning and strike down a fate that was meant for me. I will never succumb to such a thing. To be lightning is to be free, to be untamed, unshackled by the decrees of others. To become lightning means to be the bolt that will strike down anyone who will oppose me. That is my will, and I will follow that will even to the brink of death. Kakashi closed his book for this one and then said to Neji, lightning chakra has many uses. But in its offensive use, lightning chakra is used to pierce anything in its path. But that is not why you're here. There's something else that intrigues you about lightning chakra, is there? I believe lightning chakra is more than that. There are much more use for chakra natures other than offensive skills. Neji replied, and Kakashi gave a nod at that. The Raikage uses lightning chakra to enhance his physical ability and his defense. It is a jutsu passed down from one Raikage to another as it is their given right. Speed, power, reaction and defense are all enhanced by that jutsu to the point that it almost rivaled the speed of the fourth Hokage. Kakashi then sighed as he looked up. Unfortunately, such a jutsu is a haijutsu, secret technique, and no normal means can ever replicate its ability down to a certain point. I would bet even with my Sharingan, I cannot copy that ability so easily. Unless you create something akin to that, will as may well be the closest we'll be ever for it. Kakashi then performed a single Raikiri in his hands and let it surge to the ground. The bolt of lightning turned into the shape of a wolf and crackled as it went after a training log and shattering it upon contact. So it will be up to you to discover this ability on your own, Neji. But you must propose your idea first before going ahead and practicing it. Anything that tampers with the body's functions should be checked by proper personnel due to a high chance that you might kill yourself accidentally in the process. Someone of your skill and talent will think of something. I should know. I know talent when I see it. Neji looked at his hands and then to the destroyed log. He knew that this was not what he was looking for, and the seemingly dead end that he had reached was certainly growing more and more cumbersome. He looked at the sky. The thoughts of his clan, his team, his goals and his own existence came into mind. Kakashi watched as the boy was slowly trying to figure out what Neji was trying to accomplish. To become lightning. Huh. I think I have heard of a play that involved that phrase. Kakashi mused as he turned to his book and began to walk away. The thoughts of plays and literature entering his mind as he made his way back to the village with the intent of knowing Sasuke's progress as well as the thoughts of the progress of his other two students. Somewhere in Fire Country, Jiraiya stood before a sitting Naruto, holding a wooden stick in his left hand as he watched the boy stay still for several minutes. Jiraiya slightly kicked the ground and dust made his way to the blonde, twitching ever so slightly. Not one to miss of seeing something, Jiraiya promptly smacked the boy on the head with the stick. Stop getting distracted, boy. I told you to keep focusing on yourself and not on your body. Learn to stay still. Naruto flinched at Jiraiya's hit and nursed his aching head from Jiraiya's doing. I'm trying. Damn it. You made me do this every 2 hours before proper training. What's the purpose of this anyway? Jiraiya merely scoffed at the boy's response. It's to help you with what I'm about to teach you in a few short months. Keep at it and you'll be doing this for the rest of the training trip. We've been doing this stupid exercise for half a year since we left the village. Naruto complained. As he stretched his legs on the ground for a moment and leaned down to grab the tip of his toes and extending it to relieve the tension in his feet. And it will take us more than half a year if you keep getting distracted. Now get back to your position and do it again. We still have an hour and 45 minutes left before we start with the physical training. Then stop distracting me, Ero Sennin. Naruto answered back. Jiraiya grew a tick mark on the back of his head. It is part of the training, dumbass. And stop calling me Ero Sennin. Jiraiya whacked Naruto again for good measure. Whack. Ow. Sit your ass down in a lotus position, brat, and stop moving. Jiraiya ordered the boy, to which Naruto complied, although begrudgingly. 1 hour and several more bruises later, Naruto was now readying himself for some training in taijutsu. Jiraiya had to remind him that his taijutsu should befit his arsenal to create a better sense of advantage. A form of movement that only he can do sounded like a sweet deal to him. After all, how can someone be prepared if they have no prior knowledge of his ability? That would certainly be something if they weren't aware of his movements. For the first month, Jiraiya only taught Naruto about the basics, fighting in close range, correcting many errors in his stance and weapon grips, and being taught how to disarm opponents and using joint locks and throws. Jiraiya emphasized that Naruto only needed the bare bones on learning how to fight. The usage of such techniques only truly depended on Naruto's judgment and how he's going to do them. Of course, when it came to sparring, Jiraiya was surprised that Naruto had good decision-making capabilities on his own when he fought. Naruto fought like his life depended on it. He fought with proficiency of a seasoned war veteran and his movements were calculating with every step. They were very subtle. The way Naruto moved, the way he reacted to every punch Jiraiya could dish out, and the way he seemed to move fluidly as he went around. His movements didn't have patterns in them except that he tends to go around in circles for a few seconds and occasionally glancing to his side, just like a predator. Jiraiya had appreciated Danzo's effective training methods in honing Naruto's fighting potential. Naruto was like a proverbial storm in his eyes that are a vicious animal. He moves randomly and strikes hard when he does so. His unpredictable nature only seemed to flourish more and more as Naruto thrived from his teachings every day. The blonde even started taking down his fuinjutsu lessons well too. Naruto was like a sponge when he began his lectures in the art of sealing. Naruto was quite enthusiastic on the subject, and his enthusiasm brought forth the hidden talent within him. If Jiraiya didn't know any better, he would be saying that Naruto's affinity for the art was in his blood. By Jiraiya's estimate, Naruto would be able to create and use his own seal designs in less than a decade if he kept it up. It truly was a waste of potential to see the village squander away such talent within the boy. Danzo may have been a prick, but that man knew talent when he saw one. He wasn't the rival of Sarutobi Hiruzen for nothing. That interest, of course, was only brought out when Naruto had the right teacher. Danzo wouldn't have been interested in the boy if it weren't for the Kyuubi and the recently shown potential that Naruto was capable of. Which came to Jiraiya's other conclusion when it came to the old crone. Danzo may be good at seeing talent and their worth as a utility, but he was prone to submitting to first impressions. As the self-proclaimed shinobi of darkness, that was probably his weakness. Jiraiya had then looked at the boy as he listed Naruto's growing set of skills. His taijutsu was very practical with little to no flashy individual moves and consisted of coordinating movements with his clones. Over a year ago, Naruto developed that system with barely anything but his own wits and tenacity about him. Now, only very few openings were made, they were calculating, dangerous and outright vicious if he wanted to. If he were to be compared to taijutsu practitioners his age, then Lee would be like a battering ram or a siege engine, designed to plow through enemy defenses with brute force, and Naruto would be the unstoppable berserker laying waste to the poor souls he sets his sights on. The mere intimidation factor alone would be enough to scare the weak with those skills. His elemental training, though, was something else. Jiraiya didn't see it at first, but Naruto's proficiency in his element was something he had trouble believing initially. When Naruto explained to him, Jiraiya was left picking up his jaw on the floor as Naruto slashed away at a large rock with nothing but his hands. The stone had been cut pretty clean too. The area where Naruto had slashed away was as smooth as a stone worker's carvings. If it was wet enough, Jiraiya would have probably slipped and fell from the rock. Naruto's explanation, though, was that he was inspired when he saw how the Hyuga fought. He took tips from Hinata in how to apply devastating chakra blows on his palms and then made it even better by applying it to his fingertips and turning that chakra into wind nature. They were simple principles, but Jiraiya knew the effectiveness of Naruto's new jutsu. He also noticed another subtle thing about it too. It was as if space itself was split for a very brief period before that rock was now two pieces of hardened earth on the soil, though. But the most dangerous thing about it, though, was its visibility or the lacking of it. Jiraiya knew if anyone could see chakra, then the effectiveness of the jutsu would be nullified. But that didn't stop it from being any less deadly to normal shinobi. He shuddered to think just how effective it would be if Naruto were to apply sage chakra into it. Since then, he has told Naruto to write the specifics of the jutsu down on a scroll and asked his student to name the jutsu. Naruto had dubbed it aptly, Kuokanzengeki, space-cutting strike. His thoughts were cut off when Naruto asked him, "So why aren't we going at the place you're talking about, Arrow Sennin?" Jiraiya looked at the boy and answered, "It's because you're a twitchy brat, and whatever I'm going to teach you there, you'll need to stay still. As if you were a large tree, undeterred by the winds blowing, you need to learn how to control yourself. You should take a page out of that Hyuga you fought during the finals. That kid may have been an arrogant schmuck, but he had discipline. Heck, Guy's team is basically a well-disciplined unit. Kakashi really did have problems with your team." Seemingly getting ticked off that he got compared to a more seasoned genin team, Naruto decided to get back to the topic at hand while Jiraiya gave him another talk about discipline and whatnot. "What's that got to do with not going to that place you're talking about, Arrow Sennin? And didn't you say I'm undisciplined too much that I can't learn about a specific taijutsu style?" Jiraiya twitched at his nickname. "It has to do with the fact that staying still is a prerequisite to your training there. You need to have patience for these things, brat, because believe me, the training I'm about to give you there will test your patience at its limit. I did say you were undisciplined, brat. You also have the grace of a sack of hammers, Naruto. But believe me that what I'm about to teach you is something that will earn you a lot of lumps on your empty head." With that, Naruto and Jiraiya began their spar. Konoha. Several months later. Neji felt it quite right to take a mission now to take his mind off of his current dilemma in his jutsu. Currently, he has had small progress in using Raiden chakra, and the most he could do was emulate once more what he had done several months prior during his fight with Tenten against Kidomaru. He can surge lightning chakra to someone's tenketsu, and not only could he close it, he could also affect the surrounding area and adjacent tenketsu to disturb chakra flow and cause involuntary muscle spasms. At least he could in theory. He had understood how to apply it. He just didn't have the luxury to do it against anyone else for fear of accidentally causing conduction problems on the heart. "Ah, Neji-san, is that you?" A voice had cut him out of his thoughts as he saw Izumo and Kotetsu going up to the Hokage's office with a stack of papers that were obscuring their faces. The only reason he had recognized the two was because of their voices, and they always seemingly stick around each other. Neji bowed slightly. "Izumo-san, Kotetsu-san, to what do I owe the pleasure of you calling me?" The one on the left spoke. "Well, we just checked one of the papers lined up here and we were surprised that your name came up for recommendation for Junin. We know it's almost been a year since your promotion, but we think Gai-san has been gauging your abilities quite well since you were genin. It's a real surprise that he would put your name this early on. Thank you for informing me, Azumo-san, Katetsu-san, though I must decline for now. I fear that I am not ready to take such a position. Azumo and Katetsu looked at each other and then to Neji as Katetsu answered, no one is truly ready to take the position of Junin, Neji-san. Though it would not surprise me if you become one in a few years, after all, you learn very fast and understand concepts really well. Uchiha Sasuke is already finishing up his training in Anbu in a few weeks. You can be sure that once he gets out of that organization, he'll at least be at Junin level as well. That is Kakashi's unit for you. The man can act lazy and unmotivated at times, but when he does things, he does not half-ass his way about it. Apparently, he's passed his talent on to his 3 students. Azumo commented with a smirk. If there's no other thing to say to me, then I thank you for your time, Azumo-san, Katetsu-san. But I need to take a mission to clear my mind for a problem I have been having. Neji bowed and went about his way towards the Hokage office for a mission. He had expected for Chunin to have much more interesting jobs compared to genin who were often stuck with doing menial labor like farming at the town outskirts. He had his fair share of frustration with his time as genin as well, and he could remember retrieving that hellish demon incarnate by the name of Tora. He remembered how the daimyo's wife kept choking the thing as if it was his only sense of satisfaction with the stupid mission. Indeed, doing chores as missions. Neji felt insulted. But as time moved on and his exposure to the life of a shinobi becoming apparent, Neji grew appreciative of these missions. Chores meant less conflict, lesser deaths they had to deal with, and more peace. He had gotten a taste of war during the invasion of Sound and Sand, and even though he was limited in fighting, he participated in escorting frightened civilians to safety. Needless to say, he had grown much appreciative of the mundane from time to time. Tsunade had given him little regard as she handed him with a mission scroll from the pile of C ranks that was piling up a little to her left. She was reading a piece of paper in her hand as Tsunade told him, pass this on to Hiyashi once you've finished with your mission today. Tell him that the next time he asks for favors, he should make sure that the reward goes down first next time. I can't spare another of my newly minted Chunin for another break. Kurenai's whole team and Shuza's kid should be enough. Neji bowed at her as she left the room and met up with his client asking for an escort to the nearby town. At day's end, he would get back to Konoha just in time for meeting up with Lee and Tenten. He would never say it outright, but he enjoyed meeting up with his team to chat from time to time. It made him more connected to the people outside his clan. And to him, a branch member who has supposedly no future inside the clan, the outside support that he had was something very helpful to him. He could be there to unwind and not let the overbearing traditions of the Hyuga clan invade his thoughts every now and then. I heard Kiba asked for a leave a few days ago, and that was why no one's seen him in the village yet. Tenten remarked as she ate her bowl of cold soba noodles. Strange, Hinata-sama took Hanabi-sama to one of her mother's old home to the south yesterday. She had been fretting that she had hit a wall in her training, and Hiyashi-sama had asked the Hokage for her leave as well. I think she is near Wave Country at this point. He had said it was necessary for Hinata-sama and Hanabi-sama to learn the history of her mother's clan. Neji remarked as he set the tea near to him. Lee had raised an eyebrow at this. Are you not supposed to be with them, Neji? Surely Hiyashi-sama would not just send anyone out with his 2 daughters away from Konoha like that, even if Hinata-sama is a capable Chunin. Ko-san is with them. Neji replied before drinking his tea, and Hinata-sama is no slouch as a fighter. I would dare say that she is more ruthless than me when it comes to fighting an opponent these days. Tenten shuddered at that. I saw her match at the Chunin exam. I'm glad I didn't fight her. Her opponent from Kumo was asking for it, though. Neji replied at that. Kumo always asks for it. There is bad blood between Kumo shinobi and the Hyuga in general. That or Hinata snapped when that Kumo shinobi insulted her boyfriend even if he didn't know Naruto. Tenten replied with a nervous smile. Neji seemed to smirk at that. Indeed, Hinata-sama is a lioness when it comes to him. It amuses me to think that Hinata-sama could do that to those dastardly shinobi from Kumo. What really surprised me was that Sasuke-kun took part in the exam too. Isn't he in Anbu now? Lee asked, looking up as he ate his spicy curry. Tenten shrugged. From what I've heard, he's close to finish his course as a trainee. He just needed the Chunin title to make it official on his record that he joined Anbu when he became Chunin. Apparently, if your sensei is a former member and unit commander of the Anbu, you could recommend someone even as a genin. She frowned at that last statement and shook her head. Team 7 and its damned connections, I swear. It's not like Guy Sensei isn't keeping up, though. He's already put my name up as a nominee for Junin. Neji said this as he took another sip of his tea. Lee and Tenten raised an eyebrow at this, with Tenten asking, "And you were going to tell us, when?" Neji had a bead of sweat at the back of his head for this, as soon as it came up. Actually, I didn't know about it either until this morning when Izumo and Katetsu informed about it and showed me the form Guy Sensei submitted. But to be honest, I don't think I am quite ready for it. I'm sure Hokage-sama would reject that request. Tenten, still having her eyebrow raised, asked him, "What gives, though? You're plenty good enough, as it is. You think you still have to master your Raiden ability?" Neji gave a nod. "I have yet to fully explore the abilities of Raiden Chakra. Kakashi-sensei gave a demonstration a few days ago and I wish to learn from him. There are still things I need to understand. Though he has given me enough pointers and I've read some books about some of its most useful applications. I think I can do it by the end of the year." Lee gave Neji a thumbs up. "Go for it, Neji. You'll be a Junin in no time." His rival gave a smile. "While I thank you for your encouragement, Lee, I think we've had enough for today. Let's get home for some rest, shall we?" "Yeah, and I have to go back to the research lab. I finally found the ore that we were looking for to finish that new weapon we're making." And pretty soon they all went their separate ways, enjoying the day relaxing. Neji didn't know why and when he started to like the mundane routines more and more, but the interactions he had been having with his team left something very profound to him. As he walked towards the Hyuga clan's compound, he began to have thoughts once more on his problem and how to solve it. This was what he had been missing his entire life. Compared to his older attitude towards this interaction, Neji had seemed to miss a lot of things when he was younger. "I'm only 14 going to 15 yet I already think like an old man," Neji thought in amusement as he went away, but not before stopping when he had noticed something. "Tenten," Neji only said as Tenten appeared from the shade of a tree with a smile on her face. "I decided to drop by to let you know Lee has a certain someone that is quite eye-catching. You might think that, with his attitude, he would go after Sakura until she said yes or she gets married. I guess not, anymore." Neji raised an eyebrow at that. "I failed to notice this peculiarity. I have seen Lee and Yakumo-san several times every afternoon for almost a year. This would be nothing surprising." Tenten's jaw dropped at this revelation. Neji knew about Lee and Yakumo. And he didn't even tell her about it. "You are surprised you are finding about it now?" Neji asked, and Tenten gritted her teeth out of frustration. Neji couldn't understand what on earth Tenten was fussing about. "Of course, I'm surprised. You didn't even tell me. Maybe we could have set them up." Neji cut her off at that moment. "I was aware that what exists between Lee and Yakumo-san is merely platonic. There's no need to discuss matters like it when nothing has even been stirring between the two, not like what happened between Hinata-sama and Naruto." Tenten raised an eyebrow at this. "Huh. Where do you get that idea? If he's willing to go the extra mile just for exercises instead of training himself, wouldn't that be suspicious?" Neji gave a reply as he looked towards the setting sun. "Tenten, we are talking about Lee. Lee's actions aren't what we'd consider subtle. In Naruto's case, he didn't have full understanding of his own emotions for Hinata-sama, which is why it took that long for them to be open about it. Lee doesn't have that naivety in his actions concerning matters of romance." Tenten raised an eyebrow at it. "Since when could you talk about stuff like, romance?" Apparently, Tenten could be tomboyish whenever she wanted to be. And the idea of having such a disgustingly sweet atmosphere around her team was quite something she didn't find cute at all. From what Neji could tell, Tenten's definition of cute revolved around something that is sharp, black, silver, gold or dirty gray, and one that could definitely bisect or bludgeon a grown man to death. If there was a girl fanatic with weird tastes that doesn't involve boys, then it was Tenten. Since I've observed a lot of people in this village interact, it is very hard to keep my mind from thinking of many things when I am idle. Asuma-sensei had suggested that it was in part due to how wired my brain is in thinking about many things. Perhaps it is the nature of the beast to be like this. I don't know, but Shikamaru seems to have a better grasp of this condition. To look at every little thing and looking at it as an outsider trying to break it down to a level one can understand. Sometimes, I find it disturbing for me to be thinking like that for so long. Tenten tilted her head to the side as she put her hands on her waist before she gave a sigh. It must be hard living every day with your mind forcing you in analyzing people. I probably would go insane from the mere thought alone. Neji gave an amused smile. Didn't you say you were perfectly fine with a team of basket cases? Tenten chuckled at that as she looked up with her hands now behind her head. Yeah, I did. I'm fine with it, I guess. But you still need to keep an eye out for Lee like I will. Neji raised an eyebrow at this, and why is that? Because we don't know when things get serious between those two. Tenten replied. She was looking out for Lee overall too in her own way. Neji gave a nod. I see. I'll try to make time to see what the fuss will be all about then. When Neji arrived at the compound, the first stop that he did was to visit Hiashi and told him of Tsunade's advice. The patriarch of the Hyuga clan gave a wordless nod and grabbed a scroll from his work desk. But before Neji walked away, Hiashi had spoken, stopping Neji in his tracks. I have learned that you are researching elemental training with Kakashi-san to incorporate with your Jukin. Neji asked him, is it not something to be done in our house, Hiashi-sama? Hiashi shook his head, far from it. Stagnation is the enemy of any clan. To stagnate is to fall from grace, that is what I think. The Uchiha clan had fallen due to their failure to grow. Before the massacre, I thought of our traditions need not changing, but I was terribly wrong. When Itachi had slain his entire clan except for young Sasuke, it made me realize that I do not wish for the Hyuga to befall the same fate. Neji gave a sigh of relief. I appreciate that you approve of my decision, Hiashi-sama. Hiashi then unfurled the scroll and said as he wrote, change is a gradual process, whether it is for the greater good or evil, we know not. But if we do not change, then failure is almost always inevitable. He then continued, and that kind of failure, to not change under the burdening circumstances of time, is one that is always easily remedied but too late to be noticed. Hiashi let the ink dry on the scroll as he looked outside. He glanced at the sunset from his window before he leaned back to his chair. Neji, continue to support Hinata and her sister. They are the change that the Hyuga will inevitably fall into and you will be their catalyst. Neji bowed to Hiashi at that as he asked his uncle, is this your order for me, Hiashi-sama? Hiashi nodded, my last order to you as your uncle. Consider it your mission to be the one to support Hinata and Hanabi. I have yet to see the both of them show traits of leadership. But you do, Neji. That is why you are vital to the clan. Your decisiveness and your discerning attitude will be the factor in which will set that change in motion and will steer to where it will lead us. Neji readily answered his uncle with a nod, I accept. Hiashi, for a long while, smiled. Once Neji had arrived in his room he plopped down to his bed and he looked up and stared at the ceiling. Many thoughts were swirling in his mind as he remained in that bed. With fatigue eluding him, Neji decided to do something that was out of his character. He went out of his room and climbed to the roof and looked at the stars appearing in that early night sky. Those tiny points in his vision reminded him of Tenketsu. Narukami, to become lightning, huh? He had heard of that play before. It was probably one of the most watched plays in the capital since his visit there. The daimyo was very fond of the play and even invited his team to watch. Not wishing to displease the most powerful man in the country in the political sense, Guy had to accept the invitation. The play itself resounded in him. The themes were suggestive, sure, very raunchy and sensual, in fact. But he had noticed the struggle of the hermit not to fall from grace and into temptation. He watched as the titular character, Narukami, slowly succumbing to wiles of Tamaheim, regains his power in a fit of rage as the imprisoned dragon god was set free by the woman, thus turning into Raijin, the old god of thunder. It was all very theatrical and the kabuki players were dressed very elaborately. But the underlying message of it all moved him. He sat up suddenly, an epiphany crossing his mind as he looked at his hands and opened his Byakugan. The answer was right before me, all along. With that, Neji went to bed, eager to start a new day earlier so that he can practice a new concept in his training. The next morning, Neji was in training ground 7 where Kakashi was as he was on rotation right now to teach some of his peers for their elemental training. Today, It seemed like Sasuke was taking a break from his Anbu duties and training with Kakashi for more elemental jutsu. Neji approached them and Sasuke raised an eyebrow at the Hyuga and then looked back to Kakashi, who didn't seem surprised by Neji's visit. Do you have an idea for your jutsu? Kakashi asked. Neji gave a nod and Sasuke looked at his teacher about what jutsu they were talking about. It's a good thing Sasuke is here, seeing he and I are both have affinities for lightning chakra. He can give inputs on what I may have missed. Sasuke looked at Kakashi seriously and asked, are you seriously asking me for an appraisal on a technique that hasn't been created yet? Kakashi looked at Sasuke and smiled beneath his mask. You have been using Raiden chakra for 1.5 years, Sasuke. I think your experience is enough. Sasuke then shrugged and then looked at Neji. What do you have in mind? Neji simply answered, a way to improve my skills in Juken while using Raiden chakra. Sasuke looked at Neji dumbly and then back to Kakashi for a second before he said, isn't that too broad? Aside from my offensive capabilities of using Raiden, I hardly know what can supplement taijutsu with elemental affinities unless I can incapacitate my opponent, like my Chidori, Nagashi, chirping of 1,000 birds, stream. Something to that effect. From what I gather, only a way to improve the chances in connecting to an opponent. If you want a point of reference, the Raikage might be your answer. Sasuke seemed to think about this. It would be good to study about such a technique, but he already has the perfect speed-related technique that he learned from Uchiha Shisui's ability. The Shunshin that his deceased clan member had created was such an improvement to the normal jutsu that if it took Shisui a few years more, he could have had the speed to rival even the Yondaime Hokage, said to be even faster than that monstrous man that people call the Raikage. Sasuke was still nowhere near that. That is indeed a good way to supplement his taijutsu, but to do that you must conduct the electrical pulse inside your body and configure it to a level that isn't harmful. Neji answered, well enough, I already have the idea on how to do it. My only concern is what will be the reaction and how much chakra I need for it to surge around my body. Neji activated his Byakugan just as his hands began surging with electrical currents created by his chakra. The sparks of current caught Sasuke's attention as he noticed Neji's prowess with the element. Kakashi had said to him that Neji never had an affinity for lightning. In fact, Neji had the affinity that lightning trumped in the elemental wheel, earth. To see someone stubbornly trying to learn lightning and then succeeding with very little effort was something Sasuke recognized as a pinnacle of ability. If I left, I would not be witnessing those who will be able to gauge my strength. Neji, you are a terrifying genius just like him. The darker thoughts of his brother crossed his mind for a second, but he let it go. Neji was far different than his brother could ever be. Or at least, that's what Sasuke was hoping. What are you going to do with them? Sasuke asked and Neji grinned at them before he spoke. I will apply charges on the opposite ends of my tenketsu, create lines of electrical current like a circuit and lighting them up to surge throughout my body. Internally, it would stimulate my body to do more. But that is all I can do for now. Kakashi was now listening intently. For all intents and purposes, this was a jutsu that was complicated by nature. Understanding such simple theories and applying them in complex ways surely made Neji a genius by his own right. Neji then looked to his hands that were now on each other. As if he was about to hit a tenketsu, he closed the ring and the small fingers as did his thumbs and aimed the point of electricity, now shining and sparking at the tip of his index and middle fingers over his wrists. To anyone else, it would look like Neji was performing a very weird hand sign. Without further ado, Neji plunged the lightning chakra inside his tenketsu and immediately, the surge quickly took over, traveling at the speed of light all throughout his entire chakra network. His hair raised up a little and crackled as a field of electricity exited his entire body by a good 2 meters. Neji could see his body supercharged to a degree as the currents of small lightning bolts moved to and fro in his body, with his wrists serving as a hub for it, with the tenketsu glowing frantically. Everything seemed to slow down for him and there was no pain he felt even though he anticipated it. Kakashi was about to grab a kunai and place it to ground to absorb the lightning that Neji was emitting, but he was stopped when Neji appeared in front of out of nowhere and grabbed his wrist. Kakashi couldn't react in time to give a proper counter when the surge had stopped and Neji seemed to be back to normal again. Kakashi remained cautious. He had thought Neji inducing himself with electricity was very reckless and even dangerous. Yet, Neji understood lightning like nobody else, especially his lightning. Neji panted as he plopped down on the ground with Sasuke looking surprised at him as well. That speed, I could not even react fast enough to reach him, nor could my Sharingan keep track of him. Sasuke muttered as his red eyes glowed and tried to recall the events before Neji ultimately stopped Kakashi from absorbing the lightning and planting it on the ground. I'm sorry, I reacted before I even knew it. Kakashi seemed confused. You weren't stopping me because you could. Neji shook his head. Everything just went too fast before I could even register what was going on. Kakashi concluded that the electric field that Neji emitted around him wasn't going to do much like Sasuke to his surroundings, but the field that Neji created gave him a sense of invasion and his body quickly acted upon it even with Neji's confusion. Sasuke's Chidori Nagashi acts by paralyzing opponents. Neji's use of lightning is to act as a detector of anything hostile and perform a counter faster than a blink of an eye. It is quite impressive for a new jutsu there, Neji. Neji gave a nod. I figured if I made a charge on equal ends of my tenketsu, I could create a circuit that would be used as a focal point in releasing electricity and using them as hubs as they travel from one end to another and going back. I am very surprised to see the results. Sasuke walked over to them as he said, I dare say that jutsu you pulled was very surprising. Truth be told, I only expected that you would do something opposite for your first trial. I guess I don't really give geniuses enough credit to get it right in the first time. Neji raised an eyebrow at this. The desired results were not met. I am still far and a ways away from fully mastering this new jutsu. Neji then stood up and dusted himself off. But you have your desired effect. I don't see how much help I can further add to this. Sasuke mentioned while Kakashi gave a nod. True. My advice, Neji, is that you should explore more on how to do this. You must get used to the feeling of your jutsu. All that really needs tweaking is your ability to react. A squawk of an avian raptor brought Kakashi and Sasuke out of their musings as they looked up. Neji noticed as well and the three of them looked at each other. It looks like we'll be tweaking your jutsu for some other time, Neji-kun. Hokage-sama is calling me out for a mission. Kakashi replied before vanishing in a cloud of smoke. Sasuke merely began his walk back to his compound as he said, I have other businesses to attend to. I was about to ask Kakashi about something but it seemed I figured it out on my own by watching your work, Hyuga. I want to test your skill someday. Neji merely gave a nod as he went back to his compound, now thinking of something to help him achieve the necessary effect of his new jutsu. In a few months' time, Neji would be repeatedly performing this jutsu on his own, testing its limits as well as his own and extending it even further. He had realized that if he puts enough concentration in certain areas, his body performs faster than desired and he can speed up if he chooses to apply the electrical current to the soles of his feet. He can run faster, so fast that his vision began blurring if he exceeded his current speed. He did not have the Sharingan to perfectly predict movements and stop himself from having any tunnel vision, but such risks were mitigated by the simple fact that his opponent wouldn't react fast enough to even put up a proper guard and Neji had the advantage of the Byakugan to render all physical defenses useless by a mere touch of the Tenketsu. He had called this technique, Kanmuru Godspeed, certainly grandiose in name, it was a jutsu that could potentially live up to its said potential. With it activated, Neji became like what he had thought about all those days ago, like lightning. Now though, he was assigned with Jonin sensei Asuma and Tenten as they were called on to a mission to suppress the riots that were beginning to make waves from Konoha's maximum security prison. He had heard that one of his former teachers, Mizuki, was imprisoned there because of an attempt to steal the forbidden scroll of seals and for treasonous actions by divulging deep government secrets. That would have certainly been something to be a sentence to death, but for some reason, the village kept him alive probably because he had been suspected to be working with one of the village's biggest threats, Orochimaru. So keeping Mizuki alive was an asset to the village, at least for now. But it would probably turn to something else if they find out that they have no further use for the man. Certainly, being stuck there for almost 2 years, he must be at the end of his rope and his sanity. It was why he now stood before his former teacher while Asuma dealt with the problematic with a pair of twins that were almost impossible to hurt. He looked at Mizuki who certainly bulked up from being in prison for too long and a special formula in his hands that changed his appearance to a very vicious and grotesque-looking humanoid tiger. He sneered at Neji as he spoke to him. It has been a while, Neji. I take it you're now Chunin. How close are you in becoming a Jonin? Neji did not speak. He did not even go into his gentle fist stance. You know, you were one of my star pupils back in the day. You were quiet, smart and perceptive of the world, much like how I was. I knew without a doubt that someone like you would go places in life. Neji raised an eyebrow. If your goal is to sway my sympathy, Mizuki-sensei, then you should already know the outcome of this. Mizuki merely shook his head. No, I'm not trying to garner your sympathy, Neji. Merely, I actually feel sorry for you. You are stuck in your position as a branch member of the Hyuga, forever wallowing in that position with no means to soar your wings. You're stuck there and you will never know the world beyond your own borders. Ironic, isn't it? Those that are gifted with a dujutsu that can see far beyond any human cannot see the entire picture of how closed that world of his and he shall forever be stuck there. You don't know how good it is to have that freedom and have a path meant for a greater purpose and become great yourself. Mizuki then scowled as he punched a tree and it fell down due to sheer force that Mizuki had applied to it, but there are those who are simply just monsters to begin with, beings that are far more capable of much more cruelties than me. Yet they let it roam the streets as if he was a stray dog and expose him to emotions that would be like a ticking bomb waiting to happen. Can you honestly blame me for doing what is necessary? I should be hero and not a criminal. Neji remained silent as Mizuki continued. That's right, you already know, don't you? He's a monster, that boy. He has the ability to sink this village down to the ground if he so pleases, and he had just turned Chunin. For someone like that, to even be considered to a rank the same as I am, it pisses me off. Neji knew what or exactly who Mizuki was talking about. If you are talking about Naruto-san, then he is deserving of his rank. He has the skills and the attitude to become a Chunin, perhaps even more so given his current abilities. Mizuki growled, the snarl of a tiger ever present within him. Don't give me this unbiased bullshit that you're spewing. You've let that monster elevate to a level where you could trust him with a rank, but do remember that he will one day cast away that trust and become something that you will ultimately hate and fear. Just like what you are doing now. Neji retorted. Mizuki scowled. There are times when we do what we must for the sake of survival. My logic dictates that survival trumps moralistic obligations. I'm sure you have an idea of what it is. Neji answered as he now went to his Jukin stance, fully comprehending his former sensei's words. Indeed, fear is a motivator of many things. It motivates us to cling to life all the same. It is the ultimate emotion of survival. Yet it is fear that holds us back. They limit us on what we can actually do beyond fear. His Byakugan flared to life as the veins around his eyes and cheeks protruded and he stared at Mizuki's chakra. To have closed your eyes to the world and not see everything is the height of fear and hypocrisy. You lecture me of looking beyond the plains of my own village, yet you can't even see past your own prejudices. I have grown beyond such means, Mizuki-sensei, and my views have completely changed since I have fought alongside Naruto. You have no right to say those words against him if you yourself are willing to become the monster that you fear. Mizuki growled and grabbed the big shuriken from his back and tossed it straight at Neji. With the added effect of the serum he had taken, Mizuki's strength doubled and as such, the speed and strength of his weapon was increased. It whizzed by Neji quick enough that Neji ducked as the spinning metal spun above him before it cleaved several trees from behind. Mizuki was quick to capitalize on that momentary distraction as he appeared just in front of Neji, claws drawn out already in mid-swing. The angle of his attack would severely cut his face off were it not for his immediate correction of his body and jumped back just in time for the swipe to miss. Mizuki growled and gave a roar so powerful that it sent a shockwave straight at Neji, who was immediately thrown back from the force. Neji shielded his face from the incoming attack as he had no time to judge and soon activated his Byakugan as he was sent careening in the air. This is as good a time as any, Neji thought. He then gestured his palms in a horizontal and opposite direction, palm directly pointing to palm, and then his middle and index fingers were stretched out with his remaining digits closed. Neji was pointing to his pulse as lightning began to crackle madly just as Mizuki was about to charge at him with claws drawn out once more, this time, with a thrusting maneuver as if he was about to deliver a death blow. I won't let you. Beast. 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 Neji soon vanished within a flash and just as quickly appeared beside Mizuki with his middle and index fingers tapping on the former teacher's outstretched hand. What happened next was instantaneous. One of Mizuki's forearm tenketsu was wide open and now bore a hole straight to the other side. Blood flew everywhere as Mizuki felt it late to register the pain of having something put a hole through and through his arm. Ah! Mizuki howled as Neji spoke. Naruto-san has taught me to fight my destiny, to fight against my cage and see what is beyond the iron bars of my own pathetic cell. This is one of those results, combining Jukin with an elemental affinity, enhancing it to a point where I am nearly untouchable. This is Kanmuru Godspeed, and what you have experienced with Kanmuru is Shippu Jinrei, Hurricane Swift Thunder. Now Neji returned to his Jukin stance as the lightning arcs surging around him began concentrating on his feet and he crouched down. Don't get cocky. Mizuki shouted and jumped in the air and with his good arm, gathered chakra on it sending a shockwave of 3 highly pressurized winds shaped like claws. But Neji was prepared. He had leaned forward and disappeared just as the waves of chakra claws were about to make contact with his face. Time seemed to slow down for both Neji and Mizuki as the Hyuga prodigy vanished in less than a second and reappeared just to his front, his right palm already in mid-swing. Hake Kusho, 8 trigrams. Air palm. Then a wave of vacuum air had hit him dead on the stomach as he was slightly pushed from their last area. Mizuki had no time to assess the situation as he felt something heavy above him. He glanced up. As he couldn't lift his head, he growled as Neji disappeared once more only to appear to his left and began bombarding him with finger strikes straight to his abdomen, with Neji disappearing and reappearing all around him so fast. Performing the Hakurokujuyansho only took him a fourth of the time he had done at his best in his normal state. Mizuki fell on one knee gasping for breath as he hung his head low and blood seeped from the former points of Tenketsu that the Hyuga prodigy just obliterated with a touch of his fingers. Neji stood before him, lightning crackling all around his body, his hair fizzled as the energy coursed through them. Neji simply glowed from the ionic charges from his chakra nature while the arcs of plasma encircled around him, forming a field of electricity to burn away those that would enter its realm. You have never understood your own fear. You never once tried to conquer it. Merely, you let it control you. And once you were thoroughly afraid, you resorted to means that would put you on the same level as what you supposedly hated. From that moment on, you have given yourself up to fear completely. You are an insult to Naruto-san, Mizuki-sensei. He has fought hard, tooth and nail, to become one of the most respected ninjas in this village. My loss against him is proof of his strength of character. He conquered his own fear and refused to fall against all odds. You never had that courage. You only had hatred to guide you. I actually pity you, Mizuki-sensei. Neji said this as he reeled his left hand back and chakra flared around his palm. From the start, you had nothing and you will continue to have that in the end, nothing. You have lost not to me, but to your own fear. That bitterness within you will continue to be with you, because you have not opened your own eyes. Neji then struck Mizuki at the chest just as the tiger-like features receded and his chakra system suddenly began collapsing in on itself. Before Mizuki could say anything, he coughed out so much blood that his entire chin was tainted with the red fluid and it flowed down to his body. Someday, you will see, that monster will come for you all. Mizuki stated weakly and raspy just as his heart gave in. And with that, Mizuki fell to the ground, the last of his breath left him. The agony of having his entire chakra system being burned escaped him just as Neji closed his eyes. If that day truly comes, then it will be the time that I will feel true betrayal. Naruto followed the will of those who truly hated him and he has succumbed to that destiny, but until then, I will continue to believe in what he has taught me. I will conquer my own destiny. Neji had taught about many things before he had decided to kill Mizuki, about his knowledge about Orochimaru, about the serum he had taken, about many of the assets that the snake had left lying around the village out of sheer arrogance. It was then that Neji concluded that Mizuki was not part of something bigger, he was nothing more than a disposable pawn, a mere thug compared to the ranks of Kabuto and possibly the sound ninjas that they had fought nearly 2 years ago. The intelligence department only got out as much data as they could. Mizuki was either to rot in his cell forever or be executed anyway. He was living in borrowed time. Perhaps Mizuki knew about that, it was why he wanted to escape. He wanted to get away from certain death. The irony of it was not lost on Neji. Mizuki fought against his fate, just like he did, but Mizuki could not escape his. Hokage Tower. Tsunade looked at the mission reports filed by Sarutobi Asuma and she turned to glance at Neji and then at Tenten who remained still. She put the folder down and asked Asuma. I am to assume that the Fujin Raijin brothers were dealt with swiftly? Tsunade asked. Asuma gave a nod as he continued, they were not much trouble, Hokage-sama. Tenten managed to save the day for that one. Tsunade gave a knowing smile as she then looked at Neji. How are you holding up, Neji? Did Mizuki give you any trouble? Neji gave a simple answer. His statements and actions have only reinforced in what I was planning to do with him, Hokage-sama. He knows nothing. And that serum he has taken was nothing more than a steroid that causes permanent damage to the chakra pathways. A very crude and very unsafe form of the cursed seal. There's nothing remaining of it after it burned Mizuki-sensei's entire chakra pathways. With or without the tenketsu being damaged, he would have died regardless. Tsunade gave a grim nod of her head as she said, I suspected as much. Still, it would have been nice to have that bastard die slowly and painfully after everything that he did. The only leverage he had was Orochimaru, and even that was very sparse compared to what we have gained throughout our intelligence divisions, and the cursed seal information we have is more informative than that crude formula. It's probably just a prototype that was thrown away. A moment of silence escaped the office as Tsunade arranged the papers in her hand. Asuma, Tenten, you're free to go. Neji, you stay behind, we have much to discuss. Asuma gave a nod as did Tenten, but not before looking at Neji for a second and then leaving with Asuma as well, obviously concerned for her teammate as well. I've been meaning to think about your rank for some time now. Meta Guy has been insistent about you and your teammates' ranks ever since he found out Kakashi's student just got accepted officially into Anbu a while ago. Neji seemed surprised at this, but Neji decided to remain calm just as Tsunade gave an annoyed look. I swear your teacher is a stubborn bull most of the time, and after that whole fiasco of dramatic reading in front of the entire village after losing a bet, I swear I should reconsider what that man says from his mouth, but I just can't seem to find anything wrong with what he keeps on saying about your team, especially you. Tsunade looked at Neji's expression. It was very minute, but she could tell that Neji was surprised. Tsunade merely smiled and said, you shouldn't be surprised by it. After all, I've been giving it a lot of consideration, and I found out that not only are you capable of holding the rank, but mentally, you are just as prepared for it as well. I'm sure you will fit in with this new responsibility. Neji remained silent as Tsunade stamped his promotional papers and she handed it over to him. Now go report to your uncle, tell him the good news. With that, Neji left the office and went back to the Hyuga clan grounds. He was greeted by his relatives with a bow and approached the office of his uncle with disbelief still in his eyes. When he had talked to his uncle, Hiashi couldn't help but give out a small smile as he looked outside the window. Neji, you cannot believe of how much it assures me of our future with you there, with your cousins. The clan will survive and it will live on well past my time. You, Hinata and Hanabi, you three are the hope of this clan and you will lead it to a change for the better. For that, I am proud to have watched your growth, for better or worse. Neji finally spoke for the first time. Is it why you have sent Hinata-sama on her own training trip as well? Hiashi nodded. What I wanted for Hinata was to reconnect with the roots of her mother's heritage. My wife was from a clan that was said to have been the guardians of Otsuki Hamura's writings and teachings. They were a clan that was driven to extinction by the same methods that we are doing now. They couldn't adapt to change and so isolated themselves to obscurity. My wife was the last member of that clan to have gone to the outside world, as we were the last line of connections that her clan had for centuries. I am afraid that with her gone, the ways of her clan goes along with her. In order for my wife's will to live on, I had asked Hinata to learn more about her mother and not just to help her overcome her wall. Hiashi then put his hands behind his back as he looked outside. I have never been a good father to her. I have pushed her by stepping on her confidence and trampling on her emotions. I didn't see the impact of what I had done, especially her relationship with her sister, until Uzumaki Naruto came to her life. She does not want to be the heir, yet she seeks to be acknowledged by me and wants to maintain her relationship with her little sister. I had a hard time just thinking about what to do in order to prevent the elders from marking her with the cursed seal. I have already failed twice, once with you and then with your father. I do not want to have a third mistake at the cost of the life of my daughter. It was then that I realized that what matters more than legacies and traditions is family. No matter what happens to us, change is bound to happen sooner than later. I want Hyuga to be strong, to weather the storm of this change and come out better. It is why I had to do what I had to do. Someday, Neji, my daughters will grow up and they will marry. I want you to be there for them if I were to die sooner than expected. I want them to be happy. I want you to be free from this. Neji watched as Hiashi looked at the small picture on his desk, the image of his family, his wife, his daughters and him, all in one picture. But most of all, I do not want more families being broken apart by age-old traditions that have no place in the future. With that, Neji solemnly took in all of Uncle's words and took them to heart. He was now a Junin, his responsibilities now were bigger than it was before and he would proudly carry this title with pride. He had entered his room, the sun was very much still out, but he could tell it was about to set. He looked up to the blue skies above him, not a single cloud could cover them today. The day was clearer than most days he had seen today. A small smile escaped his lips that day, for he had earned his most valued treasure. He had earned his freedom. With Naruto. Naruto learned how to remain still several months ago and now, Jiraiya was teaching him to sense chakra that was all around him. The ambient energy Jiraiya had been telling him about was natural chakra, the life force of the very planet. He had come into the conclusion that this was one of the things Jiraiya was talking about. If he could enter sage mode, he would be much, much stronger than most other shinobi. Jiraiya had said that being a sage was being akin to a god, Earth's very own herald given physical form. He remained still as he emptied his mind. Nature chakra was ambient, very calm, yet it had the density much more potent than regular chakra. He had been learning to sense it for several weeks now and so far, he had been progressing by leaps and bounds. His thoughts were suddenly cut off, when he had entered the realm of the Biju and he stood up. What's going on here? Then, just behind him, he could see the static of a boy just about his height, platinum blonde hair gracing his youthful appearance, who had a full line of stitching just below his left eye and lining his left cheek, blurring and reforming again and again. Beside him Asura looked worried. This person looked haggard from what he could tell, there were wounds and scabs littering his body, his clothes were in tatters, as if he looked like a vagabond. He was kneeling on the ground, head hung low with chains pulling on his arms sideways as he remained there, almost motionless. Behind him was a large three-tailed beast that looked grotesquely like a turtle with one eye visible from the jagged maws of its head. Who are you? Naruto asked and Asura looked at the three-tailed beast. Isobu. The three-tailed being looked down at Asura, a look of surprise made its way onto Isobu's face as he said to the man standing beside Naruto. Asura, am I to assume he is your host, Isobu? Asura asked and then, finally, the shackled boy spoke to them. In my hour of despair, I must be hallucinating. For now, there are people standing before me with the Kyuubi standing behind them. Tell me, Isobu, why is this happening? The three-tailed beast gave a curt reply. Well, you wanted someone to talk to other than me in your final hours. It has been some time since you have shown that kind of innocence and sincerity ever since your encounter with that masked man. Even if you were the Yondaime Mizukage, you are still as human as can be, Yagura. Chapter 20. Metamorphosis End. The high-pitched sound of the metal smashing against metal could be heard throughout the small dark room with only but an orange light emanating from one part of it. Inside were three people, all wearing protective masks, rubber suits and goggles, and each of them had a hammer in one hand and a gripping tool on the other. On the anvil was a long flat piece of recently forged metal, its tip glowing red as it was grabbed recently from a furnace just a few feet from them. To the very end of the room were a table and multiple scrolls spread everywhere. If someone were to look closely, they would conclude that the writings on those scrolls were fuinjutsu inscriptions. They were used in some form of utility within the research department's own forgery. I must say, the progress we have been making with these prototypes have so far been very quick and very good. I guess it really is good to have someone who knows weapons and their use inside and out. The only male of the group replied as he smashed the piece of metal with his hammer as Tenten and Shiho held it firmly on the anvil. Clang. Sensei, we've been saying that to you for the past 2 years. You need someone's help in something like this. You cannot believe how many people are interested in your projects. Shiho replied, giving an exasperated sigh from the research department's complete airheaded tendencies that pop up from time to time. Clang. The absent-minded male of the group merely chuckled and said, I haven't considered it until the product was completed, actually. Besides, it would be hard for anyone to gather the necessary ores. The metallic compositions would have surely made their heads swirl. Thankfully, we have Tenten-san for that now, and she's our best test driver for our prototypes. Clang. Less talking, more smashing. Tenten commanded, making the duo look at her and then readily complied when she looked back at them with a glare. It had taken her a while to get used to the idea of a more advanced form of forging when handling special materials like the ones that Ryugamine-sensei requested on her missions outside the village. She usually finds them well enough, the mining towns she usually goes to pretty much has them. The rare ones were another story though. Tenten usually had to go out of her way to know and gather intel about those ores before she could even get them. She would often ask for leaves just to find them more often than not. Many of her exploits were disappointments, but along with those were newer releases of information concerning the rarity of some of the ores she was finding. Finding the ores that the research department requested should have taken her more than a year to finish up, but with the help of her teammates, she got them a lot faster. By no means was it an easy feat to locate 5 very rare and highly valuable metallic ores meant for forging the finest weaponry that she could think of, and to anybody else, they would have given up for the tedious work in gathering them. But Tenten was different. Her hobbies were different. Her likes usually involved using weaponry and mastering them to a polish nobody has ever reached. Some people even likened her mastery over any weapon as a sign of genius. Neji would often comment that Tenten was a kinesthetic genius, having the ability to master any weaponry for a short period of time. She would just play it off as nothing more than part of her obsession. But was it, really? She had seen others would spend months in mastering just one weapon style, while it only took her half of that amount, and sometimes even shorter if it were just involving new throwing weapons. She found it really easy to understand though. Weapon usage principles weren't that different from each other. It was adjustment and usage of a particular weapon that was the crucial part for someone like her, and she had nurtured this ability ever since she was an academy student. She knew how a Zanbeitu works from a wakizashi and how a naginata is far more different to a spear. Applications aside, such a wide and versatile moveset was not one without flaws. She knew it for a while, ever since she lost horribly against Tamari from Suna. Her weapon ranges were deadly and she could beat anyone with her weapons if it came down to a fight. But if ninjutsu were to be discussed, she would be in trouble. She had never considered ninjutsu to be much of an interesting subject. In fact, she found it complicated and sometimes even unwieldy. The usage of hand seals in a fight is crucial for ninjutsu, and sometimes it would take a while for ninjutsu users to release the effect of their jutsu. Split-second decisions decide shinobi battles. They would be over in a matter of seconds, and she was not going to let that be a mistake on her part. But when she encountered this place, it gave her a chance. Something in it gave her an opportunity to advance in ways she would have never thought of. Being given Suiginto, Mercurial Blade, was that trigger that she would need to dive into this world of metal and fire. She looked at the stockpile of weapons lined up behind her after she had done smashing her hammer on the hot metal as her colleagues began the process of cooling it down. There was a throwing glaive with retractable blades about the size of a child. The shape of the weapon unopened would be likened to a shield, but when the blades spring up, they would separate to 3 equal parts and the shape of the blade would resemble more of a raptor's claws. Then there were a pair of small kodachi-sized blades. One was sheathed in a red saya while the other one in black. Multiple seal inscriptions were written on the scabbards of these swords as small pieces of rope tangled around the tsuba. Then there was a 3-section staff, all sections different in color from each other. One was red, the middle was yellow, and at the other end was blue. 3 dragon heads adorned this weapon, all facing in one direction, with the blue dragon biting on to the yellow dragon's tail and that dragon biting on to the red dragon that had its mouth closed. The seal inscriptions were missing on the staff's body as they were hidden inside the dragon heads. Another was a chain and sickle weapon with a weighted ball on the other end of the chain. There were countless seals placed on the chain. The bolt and the sickle itself were something of a nightmare to her and her team for a while. It was still a prototype and they still were ironing out the bugs on the seals, but with the way their group was now, it would probably take a while, or at least, until a true seals master took charge. Then there were on the other side of the room, where the table was adorned by the countless scrolls haphazardly opened, and on the floor as well, beside that table were 2 new weapons alongside her familiar ones. First there was her bow Shinkyu, God's bow. It was still complicated by design, but the ceiling arrays placed on them were slightly changed. She could now fire multiple shots of chakra arrows without that much strain on her reserves as before. Ryugamine was a good seals expert, but he had his limits and he was still far from being called a master. But the bow now was much more streamlined than it was before. To its right was a large single-edged Dao sword that had the thickness of the flat part of the blade of a man's arm and the length of approximately 1 meter. The handle of the sword was slightly curved and two rings the sizes of bracelets were at the back of the blade, dangling along a serrated back end. This was one of the last weapons that they had created. It wasn't as meticulous as the chain and sickle weapon, but the whole thing was downright difficult by the homestretch. It was still new, but she could already tell this was going to cause her problems. Just to the right of the dao was a naginata with a red metallic pole as the handle. Supporting the naginata was a tsuba that had seals spiraling down to the end of the red pole and interconnecting to one another. 3 pieces of white cloth dangled on the tsuba and had seals written on them right to the tsuba. It took them a year to finish all of these just for a test drive, but so far, the most weapons that had given a positive feedback now were the twin kodachi set, the 3-quartered staff, the throwing glaive and somewhat the naginata. She was glad she passed the Chunin exam this time with the help of Suiginto and Shinkyu. All these weapons, I never realized we created this much. There are still plenty of ores left, enough for 2 more if we continue this. Ryugamine then looked at the pile with a happy face as Shiho dusted herself off and adjusted her glasses and gave a sigh. I have to take a shower before I go back to the cryptology department. Being here has already been tiring enough. All these ores are a waste if we keep making them and not perfecting the seals on them. I mean, you have the perfect formula for making the most durable and sharpest set of weapons yet, sensei, bordering on supernatural, but sometimes I think that your seals work is a bit sloppy. Tenten commented, and the head of the research department hung his head low and went on all fours on the floor. I'm not a good seals master. I should quit now. I should just roll up and die like my sister said. The only male in the room mumbled and sobbed quietly. Whoa, there. You get depressed so easily, sensei. Don't let it get to you. And did your sister really say that? Shiho tried to calm Ryugamine down as he sobbed. I'm a useless piece of shit. I know. I'm sorry, Mom and Dad. Your shut-in of a son is the scum of society leeching off of government programs. I should just commit suicide. Waaaahhhhh. Tenten developed a bulging vein on the back of her head. Sensei, stop overreacting. I just said your seals need some work, not that you suck at them. You're probably the best at what you do right now in the village. The older man sniffed. Really? Tenten gave an exasperated sigh and added, really? Aside from Jiraiya-sama, you're pretty good. I mean, you're pretty imaginative in this art if I do say so myself. Suiginto is pretty good for your first creation. The head of the research department became a little happier as he stood up and walked over to the impromptu desk he has made. He slid his hands on the table and wiped away the mess of scrolls that were littered on its surface and looked at the next set of blueprints he had for his next project. He then rolled it after reading the contents for 2 minutes and gave the parchment to Tenten. Here are the next sets of equipment we'll be making. Make sure to read up on them and tell me what you think. And I think we're on the verge of discovering something unique for your moveset, Tenten-san. You should come over here next week and tell us your input, and maybe we'll show you something cool. Tenten grinned at the duo. Usually, the department delivers in what was considered cool for her. That meant something big too. Tenten waved her goodbyes and then went outside. She stretched her arms and shoulders as well as her neck. Working at the department's forgery really did take a lot out of her. Maybe it was why her dad seemed content in working with mass-produced kunai and shuriken. There was more yield there than selling unique weapons, and the payout was usually better. On the way home, she heard some gossip concerning shinobi her age or close to it asking about leaves so early on in their Chunin career and how they were being cheeky about their current rank. Tenten scratched the back of her head. The only cheeky ones left in the village were Sasuke, Kiba and sometimes Neji when there were moments that truly warranted it as far as she could tell. Well, Sasuke's own arrogance can be more subdued these days. Mostly the guy would just tend to do what he likes doing when people saw him. For the rest, he was almost like a ghost due to his Anbu training. That probably had something to do with Kakashi being a former Anbu commander and team leader. So the logical conclusion to this was that Kiba was probably the one who asked for a leave. When she arrived home and finally had her shower, she got into her nighties and jumped into bed head first. A few seconds later, she turned up and looked at her ceiling. Catching up and surpassing them, Tenten mumbled that phrase to her as she looked at the ceiling. In her mind, she saw her 2 teammates back to back. To her left was Lee and to her right was Neji. Both of them were looking in opposite directions, and she reached out her right hand to them before the vision of her teammates vanished before her eyes. It was no secret that Tenten was the odd one out of the bunch. She was a girl that liked different things compared to other girls. She liked her career better than boys at the moment, as she thought of having relationships in this stage of their career would be a hindrance for her. She liked her versatility. To wield any weapon so effortlessly was a sign of true mastery of control. Or, that's what she usually believed. Her physical prowess was above those of any kunoichi her age. She was stronger than Sakura, more agile than Ino, and more skilled than Hinata back when she started. By any means she was not a dominating force of nature like Naruto, a sharp and deadly skillful Sasuke, nor was she a guile and smart tactician like Shikamaru. She wasn't as fast as Lee and wasn't as analytic as Neji, but she had versatility going for her. She finally noticed that out of all her peers, her skills were plain and practical, but she had no means to take on someone of Uchiha Itachi's caliber. It was a bitter pill to swallow to know that S-rank ninja have very good answers to her array of weapons. The seven swordsmen of the mist wouldn't probably bat an eye against her at the state she was in. She needed something specific as well, and her entrance into the research department definitely helped open her eyes on many things. She knew her way around the forge since she was little, but the complex metallurgy principles that Ryugamine had proposed were something else. The man obviously knew what he was doing concerning the metallic composition of each weapon. They were very specific, very detailed, and very polished, if she can say anything about them. They were the pinnacle of forging techniques, and Ryugamine tangled with the best of them, even with Iron Country's proud samurai and blacksmith lineages. She had been thankful to have finally found a way to improve her style beyond just mastering weapons alone. This time, she can do something with them, and she was happy just knowing that she'll be able to clean clocks with the best of the best. Her thoughts soon slowed down as she drifted to sleep. The last thing she can recall were the newly forged weapons she will be testing in the coming days, and an appraisal on the next line of forging weapons that Ryugamine had told her. 6 days later. Ordinarily when she wakes up, the first thing that came up to her mind was practice. She got up early in the morning, her consciousness going back to full power as she stretched her body just before getting dressed for training. Being instilled in this kind of discipline from Meidagai was something of a blessing to her, she thought. Training really brought a sense of enthusiasm within her than with most ninjas. It probably had something to do with Guy's own enthusiasm affecting her, but nowadays, her team preferred to train on their own as they discover new possibilities regarding their skills, but the enthusiasm was still there. She made it back into the research facility as she saw Ryugamine on his desk completely asleep. She had been given a key in entering the lab and been cleared by Tsunade at Ryugamine's request. That meant that Tenten could come in any time she wanted, and this felt like one of those times early in the morning. She grabbed the weapons by the desk that were neatly standing on the wall and sealed them all inside a scroll. When she made it to the testing facility, a rectangular room with multiple targets, she eyed her first target and unraveled one of her scrolls and touched the seal that had the name written in 2 kanji, Tsukashiro, White Moon, in the big circle, and pulled out a retractable throwing glaive from the smoke. This was a weapon that was designed with the idea to take down multiple enemies with one throw. She raised the weapon above her head and immediately threw it at her target. The sealing array came to life as it spun in midair, and the blades popped up menacingly with a snap and tore through one target with ease. The seal activated as it made contact with the target. The weapon, maintaining its momentum, ricocheted from the shredded target at its first attack and bounced to the next one with ease. Then it came to attack the third, then fourth, and finally fifth target before the weapon bounced on the wall and returned to Tenten quickly. The blades retracted once more as Tenten caught it at its handle beneath. Tenten noted that being ambidextrous certainly helped her in situations like this. She then unsealed another weapon and tapped the kanji words, Sanzuryuken, 3-headed dragon staff, and out came the 3-quartered staff. Tenten then faced the red dragon head up front and attacked. She jumped at the first one, and smashed it with her staff downwards as Tenten took a wide step to the side and detached the staff segments in her hands, and out comes these small linking chains in between the staff before hitting the first dummy at the back of its head with horizontal swipe. The staff reattached again as Tenten twirled it around her towards the second dummy before thrusting it at its throat. Tenten kicked the dummy on the head before she flipped backwards and smashed her staff beneath its chin and detached them again once more. Tenten turned the staff by the base of the red part of the staff and the one its head. A seal formula was suddenly completed as the inscriptions of the seal raced from the dragon head to the tail of the first segment and onto Tenten's hand, spreading to her at a quick pace as seals covered her entire body and even on her cheeks. She then proceeded to her next target and smashed her fist straight to the dummy as it was pulverized from the increase in her physical strength. She stopped and twisted the blue section of the staff, and the countless fuinjutsu lines on her face receded while her legs had multiple lines of incantation spiraling on them. Tenten literally zoomed in on her next target and smashed one more dummy with her right foot this time. Just because she uses weaponry as her main arsenal did not mean she didn't learn a thing or two about taijutsu under Meidagai. She was about to draw out her twin kodachi set when she heard a whistle coming from the entrance of the testing room. Ryugamine-sensei. Tenten looked back, seeing the said man up and about. Eye bags were evident in his eyes by his lack of sleep. You're here too early, Tenten-san. We should be seeing you tomorrow and not today. The preparations for the new equipment aren't even ready yet. The young man yawned as he looked over at his desk to see a pair of white gloves adorned with new fuinjutsu seals. 5 circles were created per area where the knuckles should be prominent. She could tell the intricate sealing pattern made by the head of the research department. You have more new equipment in the works aside from the ones we just made? Tenten asked. Rather incredulous at that, the head of the research department gave a single nod. Tsunade-sama sent me a copy of the Nadaime Hokage's notes concerning Jikuukan ninjutsu, time-space ninja arts, as I wanted to try something out. Your scrolls are useful for multiple storages of nearly innumerable amounts of weaponry that is almost borderline crazy. But unfurling them and picking the right weapon is substantially a time-consuming process, and a dangerous one at that. So I designed this sealing matrix to act as a beacon made up of multiple seals and unique in one way or another, and I planted them on all of your equipment. Ryugamine then handed Tenten over the pair of gloves as she wore them on her hands. They were very snug for her, in her point of view. It's a jutsu designed to carry weapons to the user's hands, anytime, anywhere with just a tap of the seal. I call this jutsu, Kokuzo Bosatsu, Boundless Space Treasury. Tenten whistled at this as she looked at them. She then tapped one of the seals on her gloves and Suiginto appeared on her hand in under a second via a cloud of smoke. Whoa! Tenten was surprised that she almost dropped the blade down on the floor. Then, her surprise turned to wonder. She can call on her weapons anytime she wishes with a tap of her finger. No more moments where she would need to run over to another side of the battle just to get her discarded weapon. This was phenomenal. Tenten's eyes were sparkling as she almost shouted like a kid who had her first present. This is so cool. The head of the research department then spoke with proud smile on his face. The Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God skill, was originally invented by the second Hokage as a means of countering the Uchiha during the Warring Clans era. Nadaime-sama would move so fast that the Sharingan couldn't entirely trace it. The Nadaime Hokage wasn't as gifted as the Shodaime, but he was very good at almost everything else. I couldn't replicate the mastery of Nadaime-sama, let alone Yondaime-sama, who perfected and refined the technique to a core that it drove the strongest of men from Iwa into a panicking frenzy. I would sooner tear myself apart than transport myself quickly like that. But your tools, though, that's a different thing. Ryugamine then grabbed the naginata from the wall and gave it to her. Instead, I created an entirely new system based on it. The system was so vastly different from the original that it has become a different jutsu altogether. In essence, he had created a different summoning ritual altogether as compared to an actual teleportation jutsu. At least that's what Tenten thought as she then spoke to the research department's head, who was beginning to mumble about the specifics of the jutsu. Hey, sensei, can we grab a chair or something? I need to learn more about this jutsu that you're talking about. It looks like it's still incomplete from what I can tell. Ryugamine readily complied as he began showing Tenten his notes on the jutsu he had chanced upon, and Tenten gave an appraisal on the recent improvements of her recently used weapons, Tsukishiro and Sanzuryuken. Later that afternoon, it had been quite a while since she and her teammates met up for casual talk. She had been one to set up all these meetings for them to catch up and talk about their mundane lives if there was one, discussing rumors and even political events that were going on and from the stories they picked up when on the road during their own missions. It wasn't rare to be placed on different teams during these times when the demand for missions was at an all-time high. But still, having the chance to have a mission with her former team happens every so often, and even then it felt incomplete with Guy taking mission after mission these days along with Kakashi sometimes. When they met up, the three of them greeted each other and sat down at a round table as they ordered their food. Being the communicator between her teammates, Tenten was usually the one to start their conversation with open-ended questions. She had found out that Lee was advancing well in his usage of a new taijutsu style that he had created, and Neji was close to a breakthrough with his own jutsu in mind. Tenten told them how fun it was working with the research department and implementing new ways in using weaponry, and that seemed to grab the attention of her two teammates. They looked at her as if they saw a different Tenten from before. Tenten didn't usually talk about her life as much due to the fact that compared to her teammates, she felt inadequately plain. Even her skills were totally plain compared to Neji and Rock Lee, who had very tumultuous and sad backgrounds concerning their motivations at the start of their careers. She felt like she needed to be responsible to keep them from falling way into the deep end due to the fact that she was what possibly be called normal to anybody else. To Lee and Neji, to have seen Tenten in this new light talking about her enthusiasm in working with the research department certainly helped in making them realize that plain old Tenten wasn't just plain and normal, she had a certain quirk to her that made people second guess her. And that was her obsession with all things metal. I heard Kiba asked for a leave a few days ago, and that was why no one's seen him in the village yet. Tenten remarked as she ate her bowl of cold soba noodles. Strange, Hinata-sama took Hanabi-sama to one of her mother's old home to the south yesterday. She had been fretting that she had hit a wall in her training, and Hiyashi-sama had asked the Hokage for her leave as well. I think she is near Wave Country at this point. He had said it was necessary for Hinata-sama and Hanabi-sama to learn the history of her mother's clan. Neji remarked as he set the tea near to him. Lee had raised an eyebrow at this. Are you not supposed to be with them, Neji? Surely Hiyashi-sama would not just send anyone out with his two daughters away from Konoha like that, even if Hinata-sama is a capable Chunin. Ko-san is with them. Neji replied before drinking his tea, and Hinata-sama is no slouch as a fighter. I would dare say that she is more ruthless than me when it comes to fighting an opponent these days. Tenten shuddered at that. I saw her match at the Chunin exam. I'm glad I didn't fight her. Her opponent from Kumo was asking for it, though. Neji replied at that. Kumo always asks for it. There is bad blood between Kumo Shinobi and the Hyuga in general. That Hinata snapped when that Kumo Shinobi insulted her boyfriend even if he didn't know Naruto. Tenten replied with a nervous smile. She had never seen someone so brutalized and to the point of death and still be able to scream so high-pitched. She could never imagine anything so excruciating after that. Neji seemed to smirk at that. Indeed, Hinata-sama is a lioness when it comes to him. It amuses me to think that Hinata-sama could do that to those dastardly shinobi from Kumo. What really surprised me was that Sasuke-kun took part in the exam too. Isn't he in Anbu now? Lee asked, looking up as he ate his spicy curry. Tenten shrugged. From what I've heard, he's close to finish his course as a trainee. He just needed the Chunin title to make it official on his record that he joined Anbu when he became Chunin. Apparently, if your sensei is a former member and unit commander of the Anbu, you could recommend someone even as a genin. She frowned at that last statement and shook her head. Team 7 and its damned connections, I swear. It's not like Guy Sensei isn't keeping up, though. He's already put my name up as a nominee for Junin. Neji said this as he took another sip of his tea. Lee and Tenten raised an eyebrow at this, with Tenten asking, and you were going to tell us, when? Neji had a bead of sweat at the back of his head for this, as soon as it came up. Actually, I didn't know about it either until this morning when Izumo and Katetsu informed about it and showed me the form Guy Sensei submitted. But to be honest, I don't think I am quite ready for it. I'm sure Hokage-sama would reject that request. Tenten, still having her eyebrow raised, asked him, what gives, though? You're plenty good enough, as it is. You think you still have to master your Raiden ability. Neji gave a nod. I have yet to fully explore the abilities of Raiden Chakra. Kakashi-sensei gave a demonstration a few days ago and I wish to learn from him. There are still things I need to understand. Though he has given me enough pointers and I've read some books about some of its most useful applications. I think I can do it by the end of the year. Lee gave Neji a thumbs up. Go for it, Neji. You'll be a Junin in no time. His rival gave a smile. While I thank you for your encouragement, Lee. I think we've had enough for today. Let's get home for some rest, shall we? Yeah, and I have to go back to the research lab. I finally found the ore that we were looking for to finish that new weapon we're making. It wasn't all a lie, though. She had already finished collecting all the ores that she could find. She just didn't know when she could finish and perfect them with the research department. Neji was the first to leave. Lee and Tenten looked on as Neji went towards the Hyuga compound. Tenten glanced to her left and saw the expression Lee had when they were younger. It had been a long time since she had seen Lee's competitive spirit, and the feeling of inadequacy loomed in both of them. Don't take it too hard, Lee. I'm sure Guy-sensei recommended the three of us. He's like that. But you do know that Neji is an obvious choice, right? Tenten remarked. She knew the feeling well, but rather than feel insecure about her own growth, she knew just what to say to her teammate and to herself. Lee nodded, his right hand clenching as he looked at it. I know. Even so, I do not wish to fall behind. Lee continued as he gave a punch forward. It was fast and the air gave a sound to his fist surging forward before he retracted it back just as quick. You're not the only one. Tenten remarked as she looked up, thinking of the days of their training when they were genin. Lee-san. The two looked to their left to the source of their voice and found a girl with long brown hair wearing a pink kimono with a sash around her waist. Tenten could tell there was a thin layer of armor underneath her dress and raised an eyebrow. Akunoichi. But she doesn't have a headband. Yukumo-san. What can I do to help you? Lee asked. Tenten glanced at Lee suspiciously, then back to the girl as she nudged Lee slightly with her shoulder. Seemingly taking the hint, Lee introduced her to Tenten. Ah. Do mind my manners, Yukumo-san, I apologize. I forgot to introduce you to each other. This is my teammate Tenten. Lee gestured to Tenten, who gave a slight wave, and Yukumo bowed deeply. It is an honor, Tenten-san. Tenten seemed to wave it off. Ah, don't worry about manners, Yukumo-san. From the crest on your shoulders, you're from the Kurama clan, correct? Yukumo gave a slight smile. Indeed, I am. I am here for Lee-san's tutoring to help me with my stamina. I was born with a frail body, you see. I do not wish to fall to illness or lay by the sidelines. I wish to become a shinobi. Now Tenten understood why, even though she had the get-up of a ninja, she had no headband. But wasn't she a bit older than most kids these days? Lee gave a nod. Yosh, now that you're here, we can walk to the training grounds. That was when Tenten decided to take her cue. Nah, I'll pass on this one, Lee. I need to get by the R&D department. They've got some sick weapon designs that I need to go over and see what we can make from there. With that, Tenten made her leave, but not before taking a detour towards where Neji was headed. When she arrived, Neji already recognized it was her. But she wasn't exactly hiding. Tenten, he called, and Tenten jumped down from the canopy of leaves and looked at Neji right in his eyes, but with a smile on her face. I decided to drop by to let you know Lee has a certain someone that is quite eye-catching. You might think that, with his attitude, he would go after Sakura until she said yes or she gets married. I guess not, anymore. Neji raised an eyebrow at that. I fail to notice this peculiarity. I have seen Lee and Yukumo-san several times every afternoon for almost a year. This would be nothing surprising. Tenten's jaw dropped at this revelation. Neji knew about Lee and Yukumo. And he didn't even tell her about it. You are surprised you are finding about it now? Neji asked, and Tenten gritted her teeth out of frustration. Neji couldn't understand what on earth Tenten was fussing about. Of course Neji wouldn't understand about that, he was as romantic as roadkill sometimes. Of course, I'm surprised. You didn't even tell me. Maybe we could have set them up. Neji cut her off at that moment. I was aware that what exists between Lee and Yukumo-san is merely platonic. There's no need to discuss matters like it when nothing has even been stirring between the two, not like what happened between Hinata-sama and Naruto. Tenten raised an eyebrow at this. Huh. Where'd you get that idea? If he's willing to go the extra mile just for exercises instead of training himself, wouldn't that be suspicious? Neji gave a reply as he looked towards the setting sun. Tenten, we are talking about Lee. Lee's actions aren't what we'd consider subtle. In Naruto's case, he didn't have full understanding of his own emotions for Hinata-sama, which is why it took that long for them to be open about it. Lee doesn't have that naivety in his actions concerning matters of romance. Tenten raised an eyebrow at it. Since when could you talk about stuff like, romance? Apparently, Tenten could be tomboyish whenever she wanted to be. And the idea of having such a disgustingly sweet atmosphere around her team was quite something she didn't find cute at all. From what Neji could tell, Tenten's definition of cute revolved around something that is sharp, black, silver, gold or dirty gray, and one that could definitely bisect or bludgeon a grown man to death. If there was a girl fanatic with weird tastes that doesn't involve boys, then it was Tenten. Since I've observed a lot of people in this village interact, it is very hard to keep my mind from thinking of many things when I am idle. Asuma-sensei had suggested that it was in part due to how wired my brain is in thinking about many things. Perhaps it is the nature of the beast to be like this. I don't know, but Shikamaru seems to have a better grasp of this condition. To look at every little thing and looking at it as an outsider trying to break it down to a level one can understand. Sometimes, I find it disturbing for me to be thinking like that for so long. Tenten tilted her head to the side as she put her hands on her waist before she gave a sigh. It must be hard living every day with your mind forcing you in analyzing people. I probably would go insane from the mere thought alone. Neji gave an amused smile. Didn't you say you were perfectly fine with a team of basket cases? Tenten chuckled at that as she looked up with her hands now behind her head. Yeah, I did. I'm fine with it, I guess. But you still need to keep an eye out for Lee like I will. Neji raised an eyebrow at this, and why is that? Because we don't know when things get serious between those two. Tenten replied. She was looking out for Lee overall too in her own way. Neji gave a nod. I see. I'll try to make time to see what the fuss will be all about then. Tenten knew that Neji would make good promise on their conversations, and with that, she waved goodbye to her teammate to go back into the research and development building to have a discussion with the remaining weapons that she had been asked to look into. When she arrived back, Shiho was already there, a scroll in her hands as she read through the department head's notes. Hey, Shiho, you're here too. Shiho nodded. Yes, most of Ryugamine-sensei's colleagues were assigned to the intelligence department as a request from Ibiki-san and with the medical research department because they needed more staff to look into special cases. The cryptology department's best decoders are with Tsunade-sama right now, though. They say that Tsunade-sama has currently received a coded message from one of Jiraiya-sama's contacts. That's why you're here today. Don't you get time off or something? I mean, your work is pretty stressful itself. Tenten asked as she scratched the back of her head. She had only seen Shiho out of the cryptology department right in the research and development department. It was like she was a workaholic and couldn't stay put to relax on her job. Oh, no, I like helping Ryugamine-sensei out. Compared to the high pressure that the Cryptology and Intelligence Division has, working at my own pace at the Research and Development Division has been somewhat relaxing, even if sometimes we have to work on the furnace and the seal inscriptions. It's good to know that I can help even if it's a little. Tenten grinned. What are you saying, Shiho? You do plenty enough to help us out. Who needs to go out there and fight? Without your division we'd be going in blind on dangerous missions. About that. Shiho trailed off shyly as she looked away at Tenten with a blush on her face. Have you heard anything about Shikamaru-san? Tenten wanted to gag but retained her composure with a smile. The last I've heard of him is that he's been reading a lot of books lately and he's been hanging around the Strategic and Logistics Division a lot. The guy is probably being groomed as the next Jonin commander by Shikaku-san. Tenten wanted to bang her head against the wall sometimes. She had enough of this lovey-dovey stuff coming from Naruto and Hinata. She could smell something going on with Lee and Yakumo too. She guessed it was just the hormones at work. Luckily hers was as subdued as eunuchs. For now. Though that didn't mean that she didn't appreciate the male form from time to time. Tenten had cut herself off mentally before she delved onto murkier waters. She then asked Shiho, well, let's go find Sensei and discuss our next weapon, shall we? Once they found Ryugamine sleeping on his desk again with the white pair of gloves filled with inscriptions onto another part of the table, they woke him up, startling him a little as the head of research department adjusted his glasses. Oh, ready for that critique of the new weapons? Tell me the stuff that you liked and we can start making them. Tenten nodded. First off, I would like to say that the Tessen is a bad idea. I don't usually hold grudges, but using something like that sometimes pisses me off and it reminds me of my own failures back in the Chunin exams. Besides, I have the Naginata, Akasazame, Autumn Sand Rain, for Fuden Jutsu, I don't need another. Second, why would you design a spear that looks like a shaku staff just before the edge? Are you trying to piss off the monks at Fire Temple by any chance? Third, that giant axe better be a thing now, because that looks ridiculously overkill. Ryugamine gave a nervous chuckle. I had forgotten about the Tessen, actually. Tenten dropped her head low. I'm not surprised. But the spear needs the circle to be an indicator of how much energy it is gathering. Though I suppose the spear tip would need support when you perform a thrusting maneuver. Tenten raised her eyebrow. Of course it does. That metal could break, rare or not, without the necessary support. But that still doesn't explain the rings. The rings act like regulators. Once the energy goes up to a maximum, they will separate from one another and they will act as stabilizers when you throw it. Though I guess I did take some inspiration from the Fire Temple monks. He said that last statement with a nervous smile. Tenten gave a sigh. Never mind. But since I'm the one who collected the ores and helped you in making weapons, I get to name them, right? Ryugamine nodded, as it is part of the deal. Then the spear will be named Raidensu, Spear of Thunder and Lightning. And the axe, Masentu, Demonic War Blade. Shiho seemed concerned at that name. Don't you think that's a little edgy? Tenten shrugged. If it's going to be overkill, might as well make an overkill name. Ryugamine replied, she does have a point. And with that, they began discussing the specifics on the seals that were to be applied and the type of jutsu that they needed for it. Tenten and the small group were all excited just to see the output of this pet project now. Several months later. It had taken a while and the disturbances had been quite vexing, but the hard work they had pulled off was bearing fruit. Granted, they were nowhere as near as they thought they hoped, but the last remaining weapons created had been so far sturdy and didn't break to the numerous exams that Ryugamine sensei had subjected them in. In the meantime, she had been getting used to all the new toys she had been mastering. It was not uncommon to see Tenten on the training grounds these days practicing her use of each unique weapon in her hands, quickly integrating them in her seriously expanding arsenal in both skill and equipment. So far, she had gotten used to another elemental weapon in her hands, the Naginata, Akasazume Autumn Sand Rain, and her newest project, the single-edged Dao sword, Gorenjigoku Pyroclasm. The weight of the sword was a little offsetting at first and the single-handed style use made it much more difficult to get used to, but its mere swing was good enough. It wasn't as swift as Suiginto, but it had more power behind it, more weight, and it opened up her other hand to grab another weapon to either increase her defensive capability with a guard or shield or supplementary long-range weapons like Senbon, Kunai and Shuriken. Defense-wise though, the wide flat part of the sword served for a better defense than a single katana, especially when she spins it around with her right hand like some sort of staff except sharper. It not only protected her movements also served to deflect or parry blows and often send her foes off balance before Tenten strikes. This was a weapon of opportunism. It may not have the range as her Nodashi Suiginto and the Naginata Akasazume, but Gorenjigoku certainly has a remedy to help her against weapons with longer range. The ring supports on the dull end of the blade that had a row of teeth sometimes made sounds with each swing, but that would be easily remedied by how random her attacks were with the sword. They could even be improved upon as she trains along with it. She wasn't used to this kind of sword, but Ryugamine sensei said that the sword was a weapon of grace and not of pure power. It did have the power, but it was unwieldy, off-putting, and if it fell to wrong hands, absolutely useless. Unlike two-handed swords, the Dao was meant to be a single-handed sword in the beginning with just a few inches extended at the grip to drive down the blade further into human flesh and add more weight. It certainly looked intimidating, but getting used to it was another matter altogether. So when Tenten used it for the first time in training, she had to mind her footwork and her presence around the sword. Spinning it around with her wrist was a dangerous thing to do. At least with a katana, you don't have to do that with both of your hands holding the handle. So she spent weeks trying to adjust her body and ingraining in her muscle memory in using her new weapon. Their jutsu, though, was a different story. Being that the elemental weapons can change the nature of their chakra, their sealing matrices were vastly complicated, which limited the stuff that should be written in the weapons. The converted natures presented by each weapon can only be used for either offensive or augmented abilities. Suiginto, for example, has a jutsu that lets her surf on the ground to increase her speed by virtue of water acting like her vehicle, and she can even reduce her friction to increase her speed when sliding. Next, she had one more jutsu in Suiginto that allows her to throw highly pressurized waves of water against her enemy, and its strength is determined by the presence of water around her. If she were near the ocean, Suiginto would be an unstoppable force. So far, she was slowly perfecting with Akasazume's specialty, while Gorenjigoku was more difficult than she was led to believe. Her practice was cut short when a hawk had appeared just above her, encircling around her airspace. Tenten frowned. It was a mission. Tenten simply gave a nod and vanished in a cloud of smoke, preparing her equipment at her home and making a stopover at the research and development building before she went to the Hokage's office. She stepped into the office, now wearing a modified version of the standard uniform as she wore white gloves on her hands riddled with different sealing inscriptions and then a pink cape reaching down to her back as it was held by a single short rope. 2 scrolls were hanging on her side, held together by a pair of red holsters. In order to impress her idol, she had to make a good first impression. So when she stepped inside the office, Tsunade raised her eyebrow at her wardrobe of choice but then gave a solemn nod. To the front of the Hokage's desk were Neji and Asuma, each of them were looking serious with Asuma having his arms crossed. So, the guy who spilled state secrets to unauthorized personnel is still breathing. Why didn't my dad dispose of him earlier? Asuma said, looking serious as he was briefed on their current situation. Because your father suspected that he had information concerning Orochimaru and him being alive, no matter how much it was worth it, meant more to Sensei than being killed outright. No matter how small the information, Mizuki had to stay alive or Sensei would have lost his needed information. It doesn't matter anymore now, anyway, seeing as that bastard did the deed before the invasion. I've only just stumbled on this myself recently. The backlog of your father's reign is too many to sit down to for more than a day. I've got things to run and stragglers to take care of. That's why I'm assigning you this mission. Take care of the escaped convicts before they make their way to Konoha or they get away. Most of those convicts are set for death row, so it doesn't matter in the end. If it can't be helped, eliminate them. Lethal force is allowed. Tenten visibly gulped. How many are we talking about here? Tenten asked, hoping against all hope that the enemy wouldn't reach 20. Tsunade gave her a reply, counting Mizuki and the Fujin Raijin brothers, that's about 70 in total. Inwardly, Tenten cursed. It's not like you don't have backup. I'm sending Izumo and Katetsu along with you. Tsunade replied but then added, after they get back from their own mission, of course. Well, there goes that idea. Neji gave a nod. That's 14 people each. We're still at a disadvantage but I think we can handle fine with this force. That is of course, if Izumo-san and Katetsu-san catches up to us. Asuma gave a nod as well, sizing up opponents aside, we'll need to find Mizuki as soon as possible, no doubt he'll be using the chaos to get away and run to Orochimaru. We'll need to focus on finding him first then. Neji responded. And the Fujin Raijin brothers? Tenten asked. Asuma merely answered, we'll deal with them once we deal with Mizuki or the rest of the mob, whichever comes first. Tenten flinched. I don't like this, it's like we're being set up purposely to insurmountable odds. The chances of this mission going to the wazoo wouldn't be far off. Tsunade merely said, you're the only team I can send. Everybody's busy, out on a mission or on leave due to personal matters or injuries. I'm sorry, but try to hold off until reinforcements arrive. That being the case, I have faith in you three in holding the line and capturing Mizuki. If he proves to be useless in his intel, you know what to do. You three are to begin your mission now. With that, the three immediately jumped out of the window and headed straight to the northern gate and outside of the village. When they arrived, Tenten's worries and fears soon took effect. With Neji's Byakugan active, he told them the grim news, we were right, Mizuki is just causing a ruckus to get away. Neji and Asuma were right. Mizuki was using the ensuing chaos to get away from Konoha and into Orochimaru's grasp. Asuma gave a sigh, I knew this was going to be a pain. He must be using the Fujin Raijin brothers as a blockade to stall us from ever reaching him. I can catch up to Mizuki quick enough with what I have in mind, but we would be left weakened if we separate from one another. Mizuki would be too far gone if we don't act now. Then, 2 large bodies dropped on the ground. Both of them wore gigantic grins on their faces that could be seen even behind the veil of dust clouds. The Fujin Raijin brothers, Asuma muttered as he clicked his tongue, no use then, we'll have to separate. Neji, go after Mizuki and deal with him, we'll be dealing with the Fujin Raijin brothers. I wouldn't be sure of that. A voice said, from the way that the man sounded, it was of complete confidence and arrogance. They turned around and 67 convicted criminals to be sent to death row were surrounding them, all of them were wielding weapons of different kinds. It seemed like the riots turned out to be more brutal than they thought. Can't have you Konoha nin bother us on our way to freedom now, do we? But I guess we can have fun with that girl over there for a few hours, if you know what I mean. A lot of these depraved prisoners gave a lecherous grin as Tenten scowled beyond belief. Silence reigned in between the three as they had their backs on each other. Then, Asuma mumbled to them, "On my mark, I'll do a jutsu and Neji, you need to go after our priority target, whatever you're thinking of doing, do it now." Neji nodded. "Tenten, once I do the distractions, we have no choice but to take them on until reinforcements arrive. We're going to have to tough this one out. Your range is vital to our survival as of this moment." Tenten gave a nod, the anxiety reaching its peak in her. She could tell this was going to be tough, but Asuma and Neji were relying their survival on her. "You don't have to worry about range, I'll stop them all here and now," Tenten replied, confidence brimming in her for the first time in months as she tapped a single seal from one of her left knuckles but not applying her chakra first. Asuma nodded. He grinned when the girl spoke in utter confidence. He had guessed that this new generation was about to debut in the grandest of fashions. "Let's go." Fuden. Sunabakori, wind release. Dust cloud. Asuma then exhaled a tumultuous wind from his mouth and aimed it to the adjacent ground. As the name suggested, a large dust cloud picked up. Asuma could hear the sound of crackling thunder to where Neji had stood and disappeared in less than a second. He then heard powerful booming shots coming from Tenten's side as if a loud thunderclap had just been unleashed. Tenten quickly drew Shinkyu, God's bow, from the seal and immediately fired 5 powerful shots. The adjustments to Shinkyu had been a great help for her. As she could now load chakra quick and fire them in quick releases as well, it drastically lowered her power output on them, but the rapid fire ability made it more than enough for her. She could adjust her power, but that would take too long, and would cost her precious chakra that she would need. 5 prisoners were hit straight in random areas on their body and fell back, shocked as if she had shot her with something like a charging bull. Tenten quickly dispelled the bow as she charged head-on to the remaining 62 convicts and called forth another weapon from her arsenal. This time, it was the quartered staff, Sanzuryuken, 3-headed dragon staff. She twisted the dragon head and end piece of the middle segment and the sealing matrix took effect, crawling to her skin as they reached to her eyes and ears, clarifying and making her hyper-acute with her awareness. She jumped right into the fray, hitting a mook square in the face with the staff as Tenten separated them by their chain links and smashed the tip of the staff onto the throat of another mook with the red dragon head crushing the convict's windpipe. The man choked on his own blood as the blunt injury managed to lacerate an artery from his throat. Tenten then twirled the staff around as she reattached it and hit another mook squarely on the groin before Tenten kicked the man in the face and sent him flying. She twirled the staff again and gained some distance away from her targets as Tenten unsealed another weapon from her arsenal. This time it was a round object, probably a shield, just as she was about to be impaled by a hail of kunai from her upper right. Her hearing had been terribly acute at that time as Tenten spins around with a shield on her right arm and threw it straight to her attacker. The shield's seal then activated and the edges of the said defensive weapon separated and formed a glaive as it tore through the one who threw the kunai at her. The man had no time to comprehend what just happened as the glaive had sliced through his hand, forearm, elbow and straight to his shoulder before it bounced from his shoulder blades and landed on one poor soul whose skull was pierced with the blade and forcibly pulled his head out in such brutal force before bouncing on another. The growing carnage that was happening had suddenly brought the fear of God in some men as they were torn to shreds by Tenten's Tsukishiro, White Moon. So panicked were some of them that they never noticed Tenten landing on their side, with a twin kodachi set in her hands, one black and the other red at their blades. Tenten stabbed the black blade to a convict's shoulder. The blade easily passed through flesh, with Tenten sliding the blade out with tendrils of blue energy trailing it, and the man suddenly lost control of his legs. He looked up and saw the black kodachi siphoning his chakra out as Tenten drove the red blade on the man's chest and then to his head before he could plead for his life. The red blade then absorbed the blood pouring out of the chest as it lengthened and the edges of the blade became serrated slightly. These were one of Tenten's most sinister weapons, Chishiomaru, Blood Circle, the red kodachi, and Kuraimaru, Black Circle, the black kodachi. Whereas the ethereal blade Kuraimaru siphoned chakra but cannot cut flesh, Chishiomaru siphoned blood and converts its iron to an elemental property to be used as a blade. Now Chishiomaru looked more like a proper tachi katana rather than a kodachi. Tenten noted that she had made Chishiomaru's handle longer to turn it into a two-handed sword when she can. She then vanished again, the effect on her senses still activated due to Sanzuryuken. She stored Kuraimaru back to its saya and jumped just as Tsukishiro had returned to her and caught it in midair as she blocked another set of projectiles. This time, they were fireballs. Tenten then dispelled Tsukishiro just as she landed on the ground and activated Shunshin to quickly get close to her opponent. The man was about to perform another fireball when Tenten had cut the man's arms clean off his elbows and the man felt his guts being shredded brutally as the blood of his insides exploded and absorbed by Chishiyomaru. Tenten wasn't done yet as he cut the man straight from the head down to his groin. Chishiyomaru. Shinkusatsu, blood circle. Crimson murder. Tenten turned around when he heard the spinning of shuriken heading her way. Right now, Chishiyomaru was at its strongest and rightfully cleaved a Fuma shuriken in half when it approached her with very little resistance against the metal. Tenten then finally drew one of her elemental weapons, this time, the Naginata, Akasazume Autumn Sand Rain. Tenten planted Chishiyomaru on the ground and then spun her Naginata around as she deflected throwing weapon after throwing weapon. Blood had smeared her figure, from head to toe and she didn't care. She needed to put these animals down with the most brutal and most painful way possible. Fuden. Hin Renzokuzan, wind release. Flying swallow continuous slashes. Tenten shouted and multitudes of vacuum blades escaped her being, slicing away and cutting down her enemies left and right. Half of the remaining mob was mowed down or lost a limb or two in the process as Tenten stopped twirling her Naginata and expelled it. One of the convicts fell flat on his butt as he trembled from the vicious display of carnage coming from a teenage girl. What are you? Tenten replied with a flat voice, I am the wielder of countless blades. There are no limits to what my hands are capable of with any weapon. There is no weapon I can't handle and there is no one that can challenge me with metal. For I will cut down all those that stand in my way, be they human, demon or god, there is nothing my blades wouldn't cut. This will be the name that you will know before you die. This is Kokuzo Bosatsu, Boundless Space Treasury. Tenten dispelled her Naginata just as one convict had the bright idea to grab the planted sword Chishiyomaru and tried to strike down Tenten. My blades are my own and you can never use them. Tenten then tapped the seal drawn to the palm of her left glove and Chishiyomaru dispelled from the man's hands and into Tenten's. The man had no idea what happened next as he was suddenly cut down from the right shoulder up to the man's left lower torso. Tenten turned around to the quaking man as she raised her sword high in the air. Tsunade-sama said it best, it doesn't matter if you lived or die, you were about to be killed anyway. Tenten then slashed the man in the face, the blade penetrating the skull and hitting the brain in one fluid motion, killing the man instantly. Then, some of the men who tried to get away were shot on the head by Tenten's Shinkyu, God's bow. All of them were dead instantly. This is the true face of Konoha. The merciless swine that stands above you with its so-called righteous morals. They are heartless to the core. They are Herc. The man was suddenly silenced when Tenten had appeared right beside the man, her Nodashi, Suiginto mercurial blade, piercing the man's throat from his rib cage. Your moral high ground bullshit ends here. You were criminals on death row, found undeniably guilty of the charges that were pressed against you, heinous crimes of murder, rape or attempted genocides. You were willing to put the lives of every innocent in danger. You are nothing but scum. I would have spared you the trouble if you all just came quietly, maybe you could have gotten a pardon for a life sentence instead of execution. But no, you chose to side with a treasonous bastard that would not mind to kill us all. Tenten then tore the blade to the man's spine as blood sprayed everywhere. Sweden. Ryusui no Mai, water release. Dance of the flowing water. Tenten then saw the water beneath her feet form as she used it to surf on the ground, increasing her speed as she dashed to the remaining inmates that were fleeing for their lives. What came next were the haunting screams of dying men as they were all cut down to the very last one. When Izumo and Katetsu finally arrived at the scene, they saw countless bodies, mutilated and eviscerated beyond recognition. Some of them were headless while others were literally torn down to shreds. The sight of carnage wasn't exactly new to the both of them, but to see a teenage girl, much younger than them standing before a pile of corpses, it was a little unnerving. In fact, it was downright unsettling. Tenten turned to them. Blood smeared her left cheek and her beautiful chestnut brown hair and she smiled, the seal lines receding from around her eyes as she fell down, exhausted from her fight. The whole area was practically a war zone from what they could tell. To see all of these mangled and unidentifiable corpses were something else. Well, don't we feel like jackasses running over here as backup? Izumo muttered. Katetsu gave a sigh. We're going to have to dispose of the bodies, aren't we? Azumo gave a sigh like his longtime friend. Yes, yes we are. Damn it. 2 days later, when Tenten woke up, she found out that her body was aching all over and an immense headache escaped from her head. She gritted her teeth from the pain and closed her eyes as she got up. She knew she was in the hospital, but she just couldn't appreciate anything for now, not with that awful headache going on. She had managed to stay awake during the post-mission briefing. Azumo and Katetsu had woken her up to see if she was fine. Putting up a front, Tenten gave a nod and ran on adrenaline all the way back to the village. When Tsunade dismissed her, she was relieved after that, and her spirit was uplifted when Asuma had praised her, as she was the one who kept 67 men at bay while Asuma dealt with the Fujin Raijin brothers. When she got out, about halfway to her house, she had lost consciousness again. She heard the door open and in came someone who spoke to her. Chakra exhaustion can be a bitch, isn't it? The voice was familiar, but she refused to look around. Her headache was giving her problems. Sakura? Tenten asked. Sakura answered. Yeah, Neji brought you here after your mission. He said you did a pretty taxing job during that one. Tenten was rubbing her head. Yeah, I got put through the ringer, tested my endurance and my chakra a lot. 67 convicted criminals trying to fight their way through us and might have implied about doing sexually illicit things to me. Sakura's voice got lower. I hope you beat them up to a pulp. They were death row inmates. Sakura knew what that implication meant. I see. Are you fine with your headache there? No. Pretty unbearable right now, Tenten replied, and she grit her teeth in annoyance due to her said headache. Sakura smiled softly as she activated her Shozen no Jutsu, Mystic Palm technique, on Tenten's head. It's a side effect of your weapon sense modifying technique. You overexerted a little, that's why you're in pain right now. Add to that your chakra exhaustion, then you have this right now. Tenten suddenly felt much better when she felt Sakura's healing technique on her head. She finally opened her eyes and saw Sakura in front of her. She had remembered him a little shorter then, and she had a seal on her forehead now. It was very small, almost minute, but it was still very visible for her. But that was an impressive story. 67 scumbags to destroy isn't a joke, you know. Now that she thought about it, that really was an impressive story. Impressively bloody and gory, but taking down that much number of criminals was something only legends were made of. She guessed that she wasn't someone playing with a skill anybody can learn anymore. Tenten. No running in the hall. I'm sorry. No yelling in the hospital. I'm sorry. Guy and Lee burst into the room, followed by Neji from behind as they rushed over to Tenten. Tenten. I heard everything from Asuma, Azumo and Katetsu. I could not contain my excitement when news broke out. You're pretty famous around the circle these days. This after hearing Neji's promotion to Jonin and Lee's mastery over a jutsu that will take him to new heights and a new taijutsu style. Guy had burst into tears. As your teacher, I have never been more proud than I am now. All of your youths shine brightly. Guy's fist shook in excitement. You have all metamorphosed into wonderful shinobi. There is little doubt in my mind now that you will all be part of history in the making. I should leave you four alone, Sakura said nervously as she went out of the room. But not before she said, also, keep your voices down, you're not the only people around here. Guy and Lee gave a sharp salute while Neji gave a nod. You did well. Neji complimented her. Tenten merely gave a sheepish grin. I got the nameless mooks. Neji, you got Mizuki. 67 hardened criminals are no joke. They don't hesitate for the kill, and some of them were even Chunin themselves. To have learned that you handled them all by yourself, my accomplishments seem incomparable to yours right now, rank or no rank. Tenten slightly scowled. You have better not be patronizing me. Neji raised an eyebrow at that. Why would I do that? Tenten could be thinking a lot of reasons why, but she knew Neji spoke with truth and sincerity even back then with his arrogance and fatalistic tendencies. Neji spoke his mind about a lot of things. He was a bastard back then, but at least he was an honest bastard. Tenten just gave a sigh as she looked outside window while Guy and Lee were excitedly talking about their accomplishments and what it meant to their team now. Never mind. For now, Tenten was going to relish the fact that she never had to catch up in the first place. She was always beside her teammates and would continue to do so all the way. A smile escaped her lips for a few seconds until she saw a giant horned beetle flying towards the Hokage's office and dispelling just as quickly. What was that? All four of the members of Team Guy looked towards the Hokage tower that was now covered with a large cloud of smoke. Naruto. My name is Yagura Mizukage, well, former Mizukage of Kurigakure no Sato. The boy introduced himself quietly as Naruto sat cross-legged at his front. Mizukage. Naruto uttered those words and he remembered Zabuza and Haku from his first mission outside the village. He had remembered the horrible stories concerning Kurigakure and how its denizens lived there under the rule of the Mizukage. You're the one who had Haku's clan wiped out. The history of the Bloody Mist, why Zabuza and Haku were out of their homes as missing nin, they were trying to overthrow you. Silence reigned in between the two. Isobu had interjected, it's not at all true. Isobu, Yagura had cut the Biju off. He looked at the three-tailed Biju behind him with a soft smile. You don't have to defend me, even though I don't remember all of that, what they said about me in the village, it must be true. Naruto scowled, what do you mean you don't remember? You don't remember wiping out entire clans into extinction. What about having children who grew up to become friends kill each other? You don't remember all of those. Those were your rules during your reign as Mizukage. No, I don't remember them. The last thing I could remember was a man in black robes and a spiraling mask, a single right eye socket, and a Sharingan beneath it. Sharingan, eh? Do you mean to tell me that someone of high understanding of the Uchiha's mind control technique have controlled both you and Isobu? Kurama asked. Asura somewhat scowled. Isobu looked ashamed. I was powerless to resist. That man had strong eyes. He may have been Uchiha Madara. Kurama had never detested any human before than Uchiha Madara. Curse those eyes of his. Naruto looked back at Kurama, a scowl appearing on his face. Are you telling me that someone with a powerful enough Sharingan can control you? Not one thing can escape those damnable eyes' power. The Sharingan was the devolution of the Rinnegan. It is a result of the blood of our father diluting over time. But there are times when an Uchiha is born that their Sharingan is powerful enough even to control us. Naruto stood up and looked at Kurama directly, and even you aren't safe from it. Kurama shook his head. The Sharingan was a dojutsu that was made to use us. It's an abomination. That's what it is. I have been the subject of its power twice and each time, it was not the summoner that paid the price, it was me. That dojutsu has cost me my freedom, twice. Naruto scowled. Twice, you say. Then the last time that you were controlled was 13.5 years ago, on my birthday. More than once, Naruto showed that he knew more than he let on. His carefree nature hid behind a mind with good reasoning. His upbringing was just poor and he suffered because of it. Many would often forget that Naruto's inviting nature would also be a moment where their guard would be down. Silence reigned in the chambers of the sacred hall of the Biju. Naruto turned to Yagura and said, why didn't you plead for your case? You were controlled, you weren't yourself. Yagura thought in silence and then finally spoke, because who would believe me? Throughout all of the years that I have been Mizukage, the list of the names I have ordered to be killed were numerous. Their families had either blamed me or were wiped off the map. Kurigakure became vulnerable under my rule and a civil war broke out. Although I didn't have a direct hand, Kiri needs someone to pin the blame on. Naruto grew angry, and you want to take all of that hatred with you. Why would you let yourself be killed for something you didn't do? Why wouldn't you want to live the rest of your life in atonement then? It's better than being killed outright. Yagura only looked up at the boy and smiled, because if anyone can bear the sins and pain of their village, then it is their kage. Even better, I'm a Jinchuriki too. I can bear that hatred with me more than any kage ever could. You know that, right? Naruto growled and grit his teeth in anger. No. I don't and I never will. You don't have to die like this. Tell them you were controlled. That it was Uchiha Madara who did it. Live, damn it. Fight with me, we'll beat the shit out of that creep. Yagura merely shook his head, it's not my place to do so. His sins are also my sins now. I have to pay for them even if death can be that price. Naruto was promptly shot down after that. He didn't exactly know what to say to someone like Yagura. Maybe they were our enemies, but you know, Kakashi-sensei. I liked them. He remembered saying those words to Kakashi before they left Nami no Kuni. To see the person who was the source of pain of both Zabuza and Haku and to know that he was manipulated in doing so was heartbreaking and it greatly angered him beyond all belief. Yagura then turned to Isobu. Isobu, My friend, I'm sorry you have lost years of your life being controlled by that man. Isobu looked down with its own visible eye and replied, Yugura, I'm immortal. I can't die like you humans, I will only reform. It is I who should apologize. I fell prey to that man and I couldn't do anything to save both of us. And now you're here waiting for a death you didn't deserve. Isobu, Yugura looked up, a smile on his face as tears fell from his eyes. It is necessary. Though you were with me all this time, I would like to thank you for being there for me, even though we were at odds ever since we met. Yugura, Naruto muttered. They're taking me away now, Yugura announced. They could hear the shackles breaking apart as Yugura's chains turned into wooden cuffs behind him. Countless seals were placed on this wooden cuff, disabling him from using chakra. You are? Yugura asked with a smile. Naruto merely closed his eyes solemnly. Uzumaki Naruto. He replied. A swirling maelstrom. Huh. You're probably one of the nicest people I've met. Thank you for giving someone like me a chance to talk to someone, one final time. Isobu. Asura said as he gestured for Naruto to raise his hand. Isobu touched Naruto's hand with his own and Yugura did the same with both his hands. I was going to give some of my chakra to him anyway, Asura. He showed me compassion towards Yugura, my own friend. Naruto is someone who I can place my trust also. Yugura smiled at him, eyes closed, thank you. The line was suddenly cut. Yugura and Isobu disappeared out of their realm. Silence once more reigned in the chamber. Naruto clenched his knuckles hard. This is the first time I've felt so much anger at someone. Naruto mumbled. The amount of rage he was displaying was bringing him to tears. I'll get that bastard for you, Yugura. And he screamed his frustrations with all of his might that day. Chapter 21. Legacy Part 1. He could feel it in his bones. His body was adjusting to the rigid and harsh training that Jiraiya had readily placed on him as soon as he was out of the village. Compared to focusing on one aspect of something Jiraiya wanted to teach him, Naruto now had a formal timetable concerning his training. Early in the morning he would meditate for at least an hour before he had a spar with Jiraiya for 2 straight hours without breaks, usually with a condition or a handicap for him. Every day it would change depending on the challenges that Jiraiya had in mind. Taijutsu was a skill better learned with experience, as they say. And every single day of that training, he would find himself on the ground spread eagle looking worse for wear. But every day that they would spar, Jiraiya would be adjusting to his ever-changing tactics and evolving attributes. He had guessed this was from Jiraiya's explanation, a normal attribute for a Jinchuriki. The body would always be at the top of physical fitness and exceeding those of normal human limitations. If he would hone his physicality more often than just the 2 hours that Jiraiya described, then his body would be near superhuman levels of fitness. That was why before he started his meditation and spars with Jiraiya, he would often set the pace for his exercises 1 hour before the old man started his lessons. The high-intensity exercises he performed would often leave him exhausted for 10 minutes, increasing either the repetitions or the resistance training as soon as he feels adapted enough for it. An advantage of being a Jinchuriki for this is that muscle pain wasn't as long as that of ordinary humans for him. They would take about 10 minutes and the effects of muscle fatigue will be completely gone. After that was elemental manipulation for the first hour and then adding wind nature to the Rasengan. The second part of this chakra training had to be the most frustrating part of the whole thing. For the first 2 months, it had terrible results. Not only was the chakra too difficult to maintain once he added wind nature, the shape of the Rasengan would destabilize and would just disperse very quick. Being that this was new grounds for them to work on, Naruto and Jiraiya had no idea where to go about their training until Naruto explained that doing it with just himself is too difficult. That seemed to be the hint that they needed to get things rolling again. Of course, it wasn't without Jiraiya and even Naruto facepalming themselves out of missing that little detail about the training. When they started it though, Naruto's training went faster than expected. This new jutsu that Naruto created had the pinnacle of shape manipulation from his father, and with Naruto's growing expertise in chakra nature manipulation, he had formed a small part of the technique in his hand. He had thus added elemental nature to his Rasengan, and it was now a jutsu of his own design, the Fuden Rasengan. It was very much still like the Rasengan, what with the sphere and all, but the difference this time was the presence of 4 small wisps of wind that looked like they were small shuriken blades. Jiraiya though, not wanting to test it on himself, decided that Naruto should test the technique on something else, preferably on a big rock, and see the after effect for it. What he saw dropped his jaws to the floor once more. The technique had a powerful recoil, and Naruto, who had jumped with his attack, was stupidly blown back by his own jutsu, but not before the technique exploded and ate a chunk of this rock the size of the boy himself. Yet, he knew that the chakra nature was still way too incomparable to the said to be pinnacle of shape manipulation jutsu. Jiraiya was frightened of how the completed jutsu would be like, and he imagined what it would be once Naruto had learned Sage Mode. Speaking of Sage training, Jiraiya had to hand it to the boy. Although he kept insulting and smacking the boy on the head for his meditation and stillness exercises, Naruto still persevered. He could tell his patience was wearing thin with the exercise, but Naruto, unexpectedly of him, kept his complaints at a minimum and just quietly resumed his stance. That was some high level of restraint coming from the most hot-headed student he had ever met. He was showing signs of trust in his sensei. To Naruto, Jiraiya's exercises didn't make sense, but from his past experiences, Jiraiya usually has a reason why he does things the way they are now. With Jiraiya's help, he became a Chunin. He learned how not to take anything from Jiraiya's methods at face value. And he should have done so earlier. The man that was his designated godfather ran a spy network all around the world. He should have known that Jiraiya also had to develop his duplicitous nature. Hence, his penchant of being a show-off and a self-proclaimed super pervert is part of his personality, and people were none the wiser for it. He wrote erotic novels, for crying out loud. When they were finished with another of Jiraiya's lessons in Fuinjutsu that Naruto had seemingly took in quite well despite his thoughts floating elsewhere, Naruto stood up and suddenly talked to his sensei. "I have to be honest with you, Ero Sennin." Jiraiya turned to the boy. With an eyebrow raised and shoulders crossed, he was about to write something down as a report to Tsunade when Naruto spoke to him. "What's on your mind?" he sincerely asked. "Remember when I was in that dark place, when I was locked up with no ability to use my chakra?" Jiraiya scowled. How could he not? He almost lost the suspected child of prophecy that day. "There's something in me that changed, and the cells of the first Hokage had something to do with it." "You didn't develop the Mokuden, did you? Because that would be totally cliché, and the politics behind that shit would be a fucking nightmare that Tsunade would kill us both." Naruto had a bead of sweat on the back of his head. "No, nothing like that, Ero Sennin. It's not that bad, I think." The blonde then closed his arms and looked like he was thinking, "How do I say this?" He hummed for a few more seconds and said, "Well, I guess you could say that I established a link to a transcendental being that was supposedly my former self in a past life. The cells of the first Hokage just strengthened that link because he said I was the reincarnation of the first Hokage. The chakra stored in the Shodaime cells apparently mingled with my chakra, creating a strong link with him for the first time. If there was a time that Jiraiya had to drop his brush and being stunned, then this was the appropriate time to do it. What brought him out of his shock was the ink bottle spilling all over the ground after his ink brush fell on it. Shit. What? Jiraiya felt like hyperventilating. Naruto was the first Hokage's reincarnation. And this transcendental soul was communicating with him from beyond the afterlife because of the strong chakra that Naruto absorbed from the Shodaime cells. What the hell is going on? Regaining his composure, Jiraiya looked around and tried to make sure they weren't being listened to. Jiraiya created a small barrier with his seals that sound couldn't escape from for several meters around them. "And who, by the way, is this transcendental being that he can communicate with you and told you that you were the reincarnation of Senju Hashirama?" Jiraiya asked. He better not expect this to be the fabled Rakuto Sennin, Sage of Six Paths, or anything associated with him. The second son of the Rakuto Sennin and inheritor of Ninshu, Otsuki Asura. Jiraiya felt like he wanted to go into a seizure now. By the gods, this was destiny placing another job on him to nurture perhaps the real savior of the world. Sure, Nagato may have had the eyes of the legendary sage himself, but Naruto now spoke of a lineage that traced back to the origins of ninjutsu and the core principles of the ancient teachings of Ninshu itself. Jiraiya had to stand up and he paced around their campsite. It was true that he was about to train Naruto in the ways of senjutsu in a few weeks. But to hear from the boy that he had within him, the innate talent of mastering the difficult and noble art of senjutsu just for being the reincarnation of the Shodaime who was said to have learned senjutsu himself, then he had one thing to do. He had to ask Naruto, or in this case, Asura, where to go from there. It was a crazy idea, but the look on Naruto's eyes was the seriousness of a boy who had meant everything he said. He had no reason to not believe Naruto out of the simple fact that he was too obvious when he told a lie and he wasn't insane from all the interactions they had been having since the start of this trip. Naruto, can I ask this person one thing? Why doesn't he train you? I would imagine that his methods would be far better than mine at this point. Naruto gave a nod and closed his eyes. A few seconds later, he opened his eyes again and said, he said that I need to learn the aspects of senjutsu on my own and that you still have a job to do, and that is learning everything I can from you. After that is when he really instructs me. He said that he needs me to convince the Nine Tails to take my side. A tall order, even from you, Asura. Kurama commented. Asura merely shook his head. The boy is your jailer, but he is also me, and you are inside him. We must all learn to be part of a whole and not just a part. You must learn to accept Naruto, just as much as he has accepted you, but he needs to accept you as not just a companion, Kurama. He must learn to let his hatred go, and so should you. Hatred can be justified. Asura, your father has taught you that. I'm sure that Indra has taught you that as well. He may not show it, but the boy has hatred brewing from inside him. And it is the kind of hatred that can burn the world. I would not blame him. I admittedly am one of the seeds of his own hatred. Kurama answered. Being a massive creature amassed with hate didn't mean he wasn't empathic to the emotions of those who had legitimate senses of hatred. Naruto had that emotion stored in good amount, and to Kurama, it was only a matter of time until Naruto exploded in pure rage. He wasn't exaggerating when he said that Naruto, if he so choose it, had that dark side in him for a while. All that bottled up emotion waiting to burst was something Kurama would not wish upon any person. For this kind of wrath was the kind that will emanate for generations to come. If he were to be honest, Akatsuki wasn't going to be Naruto's biggest enemy, it would be himself. Be that as it may, Kurama. Those who knock on your heart are those willing to accept you, my brother. You have seen it from him back then, have you not? What makes you different? Do you see how he interacts with you and how he talks with others? You can defend him all you want, Asura, but he still has to prove himself to me. Outside, Jiraiya had asked Naruto, why would he want you to convince the Nine Tails to be your friend? Because he said Kurama wasn't always that way. And you believe him. Naruto gave a nod. No one is born in this world a bad guy, Ero Sennin. They are created. And the images that other people perceive and what these people do are the things make them turn bad. I saw it in many people. I saw it in Gaara, and I saw it in the villagers. I saw their hurt. Even Iruka Sensei, Kakashi Sensei, and that bastard Sasuke has them. I saw pain, and I knew then that we're no different from everyone else when it comes to pain. Only the choices that we make are the things that make us different. Everybody has had pain, but not everybody has made a choice to do the right thing despite of that pain. Jiraiya sat down again, a sigh escaping his lips. The sagely wisdom that his student presented was out of character for him. But even then, the boy was right. He too believed in such a statement. The measure of good and evil couldn't really be quantified with just a yardstick of just one person's moral compass. A hero to one group may be a villain to others. The Yondaime Hokage was an example that came to mind. His student was hailed as a hero of the Third Shinobi World War in Konoha and its allies. He had single-handedly forced the retreat of an entire battalion and was notorious for his nickname that brought chills down his enemies' spines. It was precisely why in Iowa, he is referred to as a butcher that decimated entire squads of their own people. The Yondaime wasn't just a hero. To Iowa's perception, he may have very well been the Shinigami himself. The Ninetales killed your parents, did you know that? And how does my hatred bring them back even if it was his fault? Naruto asked, showing his maturity to Jiraiya. I'm just saying that your anger at him could be justified. Naruto looked down, his eyes closed as he said, that's true. I have every right to hate the fox. He took away my parents just so that he could be free. But what good is lashing out at him when I'm fighting for my own survival against a mysterious group that wants the tailed beasts? If they take the Kyuubi away, I'll die. It's better to have him as an ally rather than an enemy. Can you even convince it? Jiraiya asked out of curiosity. Having the Kyuubi on their side is certainly a big plus, but there have already been 2 generations for the fox to have bonded with the host, and not even Uzumaki Mito, the wife of the great Sensu Hashirama, was able to have full control of the Kyuubi. Naruto merely gave a nervous laugh and said, there's no certainty, but there's always the chance that I might be able to. You're taking up Asura's offer. Naruto gave a single nod. His facial expression was serious. His eyes told them that he was not one to back down from this challenge. The fox grinned. I'll look forward to that day if ever it arrives, brat. I'll test your mettle, once and for all. Speaking about the Kyuubi, I'll need to warn you, brat. Jiraiya then pointed to the boy's stomach. Ever since your last use of the Kyuubi's chakra, the seal has weakened. Don't get me wrong, it's still good and I doubt that the tailed beast is going to get out anytime soon, but you've been warned. Don't try to use its chakra until you've reached your goal. Naruto looked at Jiraiya with surprise. The old man gave a grin as he got back to writing the scroll in his hands. He knew Tsunade would want to hear about this current development. He cracked his knuckles as he grabbed another scroll. Jiraiya grabbed another bottle of ink and began to write in an old code that only very few in Konoha knew and that included Tsunade. Jiraiya would need to believe in his student, and for this predicament, he had no other choice. He just has to give everything he knew to Naruto. After they were done here, they would head straight near an obscure village in Wave Country. He had received Tsunade's orders that they were to stay there for a few days for Naruto's training. After that, they would be going to Myobokuzen and then a trip for 6 months towards Naruto's ancestral home, Uzu no Kuni. Hokage's office. Hyuga Hinata was approaching the Hokage's office rather somberly. She had just heard that Team 8 would currently be on the inactive list due to Shino leaving for a few weeks. Kiba had asked for a leave during this time as he had explained that his clan had asked him to perform a long-standing tradition that was passed down from generation to generation. For that he would be traveling west towards an old temple that his ancestors had visited when they came of age. That wasn't her main problem though. After just reaching Chunin, she had felt like she had not grown at all. Her showing at the finals a few months back was something that she had tried to emulate ever since but could not find it within her to do so. The only thing that she gained from what she could remember was the kaden and an incomplete form of the Hake Rokujuyansho. She was able to reach 32 strikes and she would reach her limit. She did have one technique to her advantage that she was developing though, and her technique involved not just blocking her opponent's ability to use chakra, but also absorb them. She was still in the process of training with it, but she was close. At least, for 2 straight weeks now, she was close to perfecting it. She had never been in a slump before and she was worried that she might have reached a wall. Neji had reassured her that it was natural. Even he had reached his and he told her that she will find what she was looking for in a matter of time. She had hoped she would find it sooner because for weeks now, she had not improved. To top it off, her father had decided to send her and Hanabi off somewhere near Nami no Kuni for reasons unexplained. She would have to ask her father later. When she reached her destination, Hinata saw Tsunade, who was pleasantly drinking her tea for once and not sake. She had just received word from Jiraiya's messenger frogs that they were heading to an obscure village near Nami no Kuni and reported to her the progress Naruto had made. On to the final part of the letter, Jiraiya had added a special note that he would be sending a coded message later. From what she could read, this would be one that was of utter importance. She looked to her peripheral vision and saw a nervous-looking Hyuga Hinata with a scroll in her hands. Tsunade had a raised eyebrow and asked, "Are you asking for a leave too, Hinata? I had your entire team on hold. But I guess I can entertain your request for it. Hokage-sama, my father sent you this letter requesting that I may take the time off to visit my mother's ancestral home." Tsunade then smiled a little and received the letter from the well-mannered girl. Compared with the likes of Naruto, Hinata was a nice change of pace. She was a lady at heart and spoke with eloquence even though she was timid. She had heard the news about Naruto and Hinata admitting to themselves of their emotions even though they were still young. To Tsunade, she found it quite a cute story, as many of the women in Konoha that were gossip mongers too were enamored with rumors like these. Even many of the kunoichi found their relationship very intriguing because of their backgrounds, and it was as if they were reading a romance novel that was unfolding. Many women of all ages would kill for something like that. When she read the letter, she had to contain her laughter. She had to keep up an image after all. "I see. How goes your training, Hinata?" Hinata looked particularly curious about Tsunade's question. The Hokage was interested in her training. But she had no particular aptitude in healing jutsu except for simple healing salves. She answered truthfully to the leader of her village. I'm not doing well, Hokage-sama, I am stuck in something. It has been several weeks now and I see no improvement. I think I might have hit a wall. Perfect. Tsunade then closed the scroll in her hands and said, well, your father requested for your leave, right? I'm sure you'll overcome it once you take a time off from missions. But, we're severely undermanned right now and I can't possibly take a request. Tsunade reassured her by a gentle tap on her shoulder as she stood up. Well, that's true, but Shinobi are human too. Besides, there are other teams to pick up the slack. Your cousin's team is certainly sweeping missions left and right these days with Team 7 effectively in the same limbo as your team is currently. But Guy's team and Asuma's team are pretty much well off on their own. Besides, you're all Chunin now, assigning you solo missions would be part of the job now. Tsunade smiled as she showed the door and opened it for her. Now go, and try to clear your head on this mission. She said with a grin. Hesitantly, Hinata accepted Tsunade's order without much resistance. She didn't want to insist any further for fear of angering the Hokage. But she felt like she would lose her edge now if she took this leave. When she was finally a fair distance away, she could hear some raucous laughter coming from the office, but she paid it no mind as thoughts of her responsibility would be gone for a moment. Then she thought more about her late mother and she suddenly had a curious side in her. What was mother's family like? When she asked those words to herself, she felt like she wanted to know more. She had been so restless these past few months since Naruto's departure. She had trained and trained to her absolute limit and found that yes, she never had a chance to relax. Even Lee, the role model of hard work, had his off days. And she had never gotten the chance to slow down or even think about other stuff aside from her training and missions. When she finally got home, the first thing she did was to approach her father's office and knocked on the door. Thankfully, her father was still inside, reading another document concerning the clan. Otu-sama. Hiyashi stopped his reading and turned to her daughter. I would like to know why you have given me this leave. She said this as she bowed. Hiyashi noted the lack of stutter in her voice. Hiyashi merely set his paper down and replied, you know well of this clan's workings and life. I believe that it is time for you to understand your mother's and what she did before she settled down here. You are just like her Hinata. She was modest, but within her she had a core of steel. But her most striking feature was her compassion. As her husband, I cannot let her memory fade. I cannot let her past be gone. As her daughter, you understand this, do you not? Hinata nodded. She didn't want the memory of her mother fade with time. She truly did want to know more about her. Her very brief memories of her mother did very little to quell her thirst about her need to understand her. I understand fully well, Otu-sama. For the longest time, I had wanted to know more about Okawa-sama. You may know her much more, but you never told anything about her other than her behavior and her way with everyone. Her background remains a mystery still. Even the elders are not speaking about her. Because her clan no longer exists, Hinata, your mother was the last one to get out of the isolationist policies of her clan. They had all died out. Her marriage to me was one without benefit in the end for the clan once she died. The elders wanted to know more about her heritage, but she had refused as she honored her clan's traditions. But they no longer exist. I want you to know about your mother. What was she like back then and how did she live? Answer those questions when you go there. But I must warn you that you must not let the elders know about what you are to do. Take Hanabi with you. She must learn all that she can about her mother because out of you two, I know that she wants to know about your mother the most. Hinata bowed as she went out of the room. She then looked at her father one last time before she closed the door. Thank you, Otu-sama. Hiyashi merely gave a nod as she closed the door. Hiyashi then looked once more on the picture of his wife and he whispered to himself, I leave Hinata and Hanabi in your guidance for the moment, Hikaru. When morning struck, Hinata and a groggy Hanabi were at the southern gate of the village, patiently waiting for their bodyguards and attendants with them. Hyuga Ko and Hyuga Natsu approached them with bags of their own. Hinata noted that each of them looked serious as they looked at the precious children of the clan head. Hinata gently nudged her sister as she said, Hanabi-chan, look alive, we're heading out now. Hanabi merely yawned once more and said, why did it have to be so early? Hinata knew the answer to that, so that we can reach that place before sunset. We can take a nice break there once we arrive and to keep prying eyes at a minimum. Hinata was talking about the elders of their clan. They liked to put meaning behind everything and it made everything so much more difficult for them. Those old fogies can stuff it, Nei-chan. Hey, Nei-chan, can I ride on your back along the way? I'm still too sleepy. Natsu had heard this as she approached them and she answered for Hinata, Hanabi-sama, it is unbecoming of a child of the Hyuga to be causing some burden to your sister. Hinata shook her head with a smile, Natsu-san, I don't mind, really. I like it when Hanabi takes requests from me, it is a sign of our bond and I love spoiling her from time to time. Yay, Hanabi said excitedly and jumped on her sister's back. She then looked at her nursemaid and said to her, Natsu-san, you may not know it but Hinata-ne-san is pretty strong. She can carry me all day without many problems and we can go faster this way. Natsu looked at Ko who looked back at her as if she was expecting to say something. She never expected Ko to agree with Hanabi though. I see. That is a sound decision, we can make it to the village by midday and we can rest there. Maybe we can even locate Hikaru-sama's former home once we get there. Natsu seemed to frown. I would expect of Hinata-sama's bodyguard to be much stricter on these matters. But I must be mistaken. Natsu-san, you don't have to be so harsh. Ko replied with a small smile. He truly was a fish out of water in this company of all women. He then added, for someone of Hanabi-sama's age, she thinks with more reason than any child I have met. She may not have Konohamaru-sama's realism of our world, but at least she thinks ahead. That is a good sign, is it not? Inwardly, Natsu wanted to answer no, it was a good sign for Hanabi, but a bad sign for Hinata. She could see nothing but tragedy at the end of the road between these two siblings. These two siblings who had been raised purposely to take over the ministrations of the ancient Hyuga clan, they will be judged accordingly by the elders. Such is the fate of Hinata and Hanabi. For a while, Hiashi had been mum about their situation. She had not heard a clear answer from the clan head, only that he will make a decision in due time. What she feared the most would be one of them would be branded just like she and Ko were and be used as pawns by the elders who saw it fit to abuse them. She had hoped that their generation would end these traditions. She had hoped that Hiashi would be swayed by being a father to two daughters, as a reminder of his departed wife. So far, at least she was seeing hope again. And she would continue to do so, until the day a decision had to be made. Until then, she would see to it that Hinata and Hanabi be safe. She sighed. Very well, I am in no condition to argue. If we can be practical and reach the village today, then it is even better. With Naruto and Jiraiya, Jiraiya didn't lose composure very often. As a spymaster, he had to keep appearances, he knew that. But at the same time, it was very rare to encounter someone who claimed he was the reincarnation of the second son and knowingly communicates with his predecessor too. You don't get that many opportunities to have a chat with Otsuki Hagoromo's chosen heir, or at least, the reincarnated version of him. Yet as he looks at the blonde who was tinkering with a sealing technique in storing inanimate objects in a scroll, he couldn't help but feel just how baffling it was to have been left with probable false flags in the great Toad Sage's prophecies. Back then, he was sure it was Minato. With his unparalleled genius and great deductive reasoning, he had the qualifications of being a great figure of his time. But then Nagato came along and displayed the fabled Rinnegan, and I with the noble legacy of the Sage of Six Paths powers. Jiraiya had seen true power that day, and it was in the hands of an anguished child who had lost his parents as a casualty of war. The stage had been prepared for Nagato to be the one to rise to the top and claim his rightful place as the child of prophecy, as Jiraiya knew right then and there that Nagato was that child, but fate had other plans. The last he had heard of his student, he died fighting Hanzo of the Salamander. To him that was just unreal. How could someone who had the noble eyes of the great sage himself die against Hanzo? Jiraiya knew Hanzo well, he and his former teammates did. They had seen the prowess of the great Hanzo. He spared their lives on a whim, after all. No doubt that Hanzo was a powerful and very skilled shinobi of his village. But Hanzo was nothing compared to the eyes of the Rinnegan. The Rinnegan was the eyes of a being immortalized as a god. For Hanzo to have claimed victory over the child, it would have been such a legendary feat. And now appears Naruto before him, the son of his prized student, the boy who had been chosen to hold the most powerful Biju in the elemental nations, and the boy who was now his apprentice. The boy didn't have much back then. Nothing could tell him apart from the regular shinobi aside from being the vessel of the Kyuubi and his hideously bright orange jumpsuit that practically hurt his eyes. He certainly wasn't as polite and tactful as Minato nor as timid and withdrawn as Nagato. In fact, he was quite the opposite of those two with some similarities with them as well. Aside from his looks that could clearly be traced back to Minato, Naruto was as perceptive as his father, but unlike Minato, Naruto chooses to speak frankly, no holds barred and no exceptions. He was boisterous, loud and downright mischievous at times. He certainly got that trait from his mother. Like Minato, that perception brought forth a strange kind of wisdom that was rare in the world. Though unlike him, Naruto cannot completely be pragmatic on his decisions and do what needs to be done, which is what Naruto and Nagato had in common. Whereas Nagato and Naruto know and understand the suffering of the human condition, a very deep personality to Jiraiya, Nagato is content in giving support by being the calmest person there is. He remains silent and chooses his words carefully. Naruto doesn't, however, and chooses to speak from the get-go and will come out swinging out of righteous fury or defiant to the core. Nagato was the supportive leader. Naruto would be the one who will gladly lead soldiers to battle and would fight alongside them to enter the front lines, and one who soldiers will gladly die for. Such was his charisma, and Naruto shows how through his struggles, through his hardships and the trials he would have to face, he was still above and beyond his own sense of self-pity. He didn't want to deal with that much angst in him, he simply didn't want to anymore. The fact that he is above normal human levels in terms of physique was probably symbolic to the Toad Sage. When he saw that Naruto's level now was adequate in storage, the blonde was then told he was in a break. In a most surprising manner, Naruto readily grabbed a long piece of ironwood that was as thick as a plank and as wide as a paddle head. The blonde brought out his kunai and began chipping away at the wood. Normally, Naruto wouldn't find it easy to cut away such a very hard piece of wood, but the mundane use of his wind element was certainly of great help to him. I never thought of you as someone who would take interest in wood carving, brat. Jiraiya remarked. Naruto, who had his lip up and looking at the side of the wooden plank as if he was measuring its smoothness with one open, replied. I don't. I just thought of something really cool about Fuden Jutsu and Fuinjutsu 2 days ago. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow at this. A bit too early to design a ceiling matrix, don't you think? I just taught you that a few minutes ago. Naruto shook his head. Nah, I fully got it the first time you said it, Ero Sennin. The ceiling matrix has to be the backbone of the sealing process to act as a network before I can apply the necessary core seals on it, right? Besides, there's no math in this, so I'm pretty confident with myself with this thing. For being bad at everything else, Naruto had a terrifying mind concerning Fuinjutsu. Was this a latent talent from the Uzumaki clan? The level of Naruto's comprehension with the complexity of sealing jutsus was absolutely astounding and scary for Jiraiya. Do you even understand the pattern that you're supposed to write? The matrix of the seal needs to have specific characters in them that are strictly for one use. You could literally kill yourself before you even know it, brat. Naruto looked at Jiraiya with a curious stare and said, oh, about how I'm supposed to break down the kanji and write them in specific patterns to extend it. Yeah, I read that part just 2 days ago too. But that's complex theory for Fuinjutsu, Naruto. How the hell did you even comprehend that thing without even starting our lessons about cores? Naruto shrugged. I don't know, I guess my head just operates that way. Shrugging off prodigious talent was nothing to sneeze at according to Jiraiya. Is this an effect of Asura's power? Naruto paused for a moment and closed his eyes, and a few seconds later, Naruto opened his sapphire orbs and gave a grin. Asura said it was my innate talent. It's all me, Ero Sennin. I'm probably just too awesome like that. That was the third time that Jiraiya was caught flat-footed by his student. With another sigh, Jiraiya asked the boy, so, what do you have in mind about the seal? What is going to be its function? Naruto replied as he evened out the surface of the ironwood with his wind chakra, checking it with his hands to see the smoothness of his cut. A sealing and releasing effect, some nature conversion seals and amplifiers would be nice. Jiraiya gawked at that statement. You want to create some sort of high-output jutsu like an engine. That's very complicated stuff. Maybe we should just leave it for now until. Nope. Got the seal design already in my head, Ero Sennin. I just need your help to see if I'm doing any mistakes, and no, not a wind tunnel, but more like a booster or something. Naruto replied as he nodded his head and went on another side. You mean something like a turbine. What do you want to do with it? Fly. Jiraiya noted Naruto's serious look at him and not said a single word. Oh no, we're not doing that in this trip, no way. Tsunade would kill me. Do you even know how you're supposed to do that? Naruto gave a reply with a nudge. Oh come on, Arrow Sennin. You get more gains than losses here. You guide me along with the seals and I'll bail you out of your research if things get snippy. Ba-chan wouldn't have to worry about accidents when we get back home. It's a win-win. The offer was far too tempting not to pass up. Ever since their trip, Jiraiya had little time to himself. Between training the boy and updating his network, he sure wasn't as free to do his research and write his next edition of Ika Ika. Having some alone time definitely would feel nice. Although it felt like the blonde had just played him like a damn fiddle. You sure know how to press my buttons, Naruto. But let's do your little pet project once we reach that small village because of the bodies of water surrounding it. That way, it will be much safer. Naruto gave a nod. Right. We're supposed to be moving out now, right? Jiraiya replied with a single nod. That's right. We'll have to travel there for about 12 hours, so we'll be there by morning. We won't be stopping by anything, we'll be making camp on the outskirts of the village. It's basically located at the foot of a mountain with an abandoned compound from an old clan and a lot of rivers and streams around it with the sea a few minutes off. We'll mostly be out of the way there but try to keep experiments relatively quiet, alright? Also, we'll have to outfit you with something a little bit bigger. The clothes are starting to get uncomfortable, right? Naruto nodded wordlessly. He had been noticing that his undershirt was getting a little tight now and his pants were shorter than they used to be. Well, he had the perfect setting in how to test run the whole thing. If what Jiraiya said was true then he sure as hell wouldn't mind. Naruto looked up to the sky and sighed. To be able to soar through the clouds, the frontier and absolute sense of freedom, that was something that he wanted to experience. To him, the sky was as limitless as his own dream. To able to have that chance to grab onto the sky with his own hands was something he had always wanted to do. He had read stories of shinobi having the means to do such things and he was envious of them. It was also a huge advantage to have in terms of combat even if you stood out as a possible singular target at times. That disadvantage meant nothing if the jutsu can't even hit you. He mulled over his own seal design on a small notebook, a hobby he picked up when Jiraiya told him to write things down whenever he thought of something really good and take note of it later. It also helped him with his penmanship as it served as a practice in writing down seals and applying theory to practice. So far, he has had to write in 3 small ticklers and he was close to finishing this one as well. Oftentimes, his own discoveries and writings in the small notebook were more misses than hits but it sure as helped him figure things out with what to do and not to do with sealing. It especially helped that his Kage Bunshin method of learning manages to cut the time of tedious work. 12 hours seemed to come and go as they walked while Naruto became preoccupied with his work. Look alive, brat, we're here. Naruto stopped his writing when he noticed the old man was pointing to a small village by the foot of the hill. The village was separated with multiple rivers and creeks that flowed westward towards the edge of the village, which was a clear and beautiful beach littered with white sand. The seaport just at the end of the town was very small and harbored only equally small fishing boats. At the north of the said village was an ancient-looking compound, or more precisely, a small castle. Behind it was a huge mountain range that walled the village off from the road to Konoha. The small castle itself was made mostly of stone and sturdy wood. He could tell just by looking from the distance that the small village formerly housed someone prestigious at its time. It seemed that he was so engrossed with his work that he had not noticed that they had already reached the place. This is Izumo, not to be confused with a certain Chunin. This is a pretty small village that holds a lot of history and legend because of that castle over there. Jiraiya pointed to the structure. One of the reasons why Konoha was established relatively near the place is because of that history. It usually takes shinobi from Konoha half a day's worth of travel on foot to get here, and the outpost that Konoha placed here has always been under the exclusive management of the Hyuga clan due to certain reasons. Naruto raised his eyebrow at that. Really? What could that reason be? Jiraiya smirked. Classified info, brat. The Hyuga are the only ones who truly know why that is, and whatever secret it was that Sarutobi-sensei knew about, he took it with his grave too. I would suggest to not letting it bother you much, Naruto. Whatever this is they're guarding, there must be something important within this village that they can't actually talk about. Maybe you should ask your girlfriend when you get back. Jiraiya smirked wickedly when he saw Naruto blush a little and looked away. What? Just a mere mention of your girlfriend made you blush? You must be way too innocent than I give you credit for. No matter. As your master, you will learn the ways of the pervert in no time. Jiraiya declared loudly, followed by a boastful laugh, and then followed. Granted, your mother would probably skin me alive, brush chili peppers on my unprotected body and roast my carcass off slowly in a smoker if she was still among us, but beggars can't be choosers, I suppose. Jiraiya proclaimed that with an upbeat roar of laughter that Naruto responded with a palm on his face. This is for training. If I have to bear his embarrassing quirks for 3 years, then I've got to be more patient. Jiraiya looked back at his apprentice with a grin as he was palming his face out of embarrassment. It was a good thing that they were off the beaten path and there were relatively very little people that they encountered. Hinata's group. When they had arrived at midday, the first thing that they did was to check in at the outpost. Unlike any outpost created by Konoha, this one was particularly more comfortable than most. Leave it to the Hyuga to provide a more spacious structure out of its own coffers. Hanabi lay asleep on her back and she had gently placed her sister on the bed as Natsu watched with a nod of her head while Ko began talking to the Hyuga members that were assigned to the post. There is nothing but empty spaces in that council, Ko. Hiyashi-sama knows this, but to send her own daughter to learn about her mother's clan in vain is absurd. Hinata-sama will find nothing here. Ko disagreed. Hiyashi-sama has placed trust in his daughter. You may think it is wasteful, but Hiyashi-sama has never been one to make unsound decisions, especially those regarding the clan. The main shinobi in command of the outpost shook his head, not when it concerns his daughters. Hiyashi-sama may act rational at times, but his daughters are another thing altogether. Perhaps he is, Hinata refuted, now within hearing range of the two shinobi, and she continued, but if my father says that I may learn something here, then I shall find it. If not, then I will train here and not waste any time. The Hyuga guard bowed and kneeled in front of her. I apologize for my skepticism, but I have been stationed here for 2 years as a guide to other Hyuga who will watch over this town. We have seen much of the house with our own eyes and nothing remains there. Not even a slip of paper. Hinata gave a nod. If indeed there was nothing left in the castle, then it really was a waste of time and energy to be sent here and be rewarded with nothing at all. But still, she needed to have some results. I will be heading outside and looking around the village. I want to get used to this town and see the important buildings and where they are. With that, Hinata left the outpost. When she arrived in town, she had not expected it to be moderately lively. The villagers had a perfectly simple yet bustling town. Small shops popped up, from simple markets of fish, meat and vegetables, to small and humble restaurants that were more reminiscent of older times. It was like time had frozen still in this small and quaint town. Seeing a fairly approachable local, Hinata decided it was time to ask about the old castle. Excuse me, ma'am, Hinata politely asked. The lady turned to her, with her wrinkled eyes, and gave a smile at the white-eyed girl. Yes, young lady, what can I do for you? She kindly asked. Hinata gave a respectful bow. Might I inquire about that castle at the edge of the village? It looks quite striking when approached from afar. The lady seemed to accept Hinata's question well enough. Ah, that's the castle of an ancient clan, the Iwagami. It is said that the clan was more or less historians even before the warring clans era. There's even a legend that said that they were present when the Rakuto Sennin's brother still resided in this world before he left for the moon. I'm sure a young one such as yourself would not be interested in much of the stories that revolved around the castle. Quite frankly, even I found them to be incredibly dull at times. The old woman laughed. The people seem to be accustomed to us going in and out of the village. Are you not bothered by our eyes at all? Hinata asked. The old woman gave a smile and answered her. Well, I would imagine that they are used to your kind for quite some time, dear. The Hyuga have made a pact with the Iwagami for more than a decade, just before the Iwagami became extinct. Hinata flinched at that. The words harmed her more than it should. May I ask why they disappeared? The old lady looked up to the skies with a reply and sighed. Who knows? The Iwagami was a clan rich with history, legends and fables alike. The traditions of the clan were very steep and sometimes inconceivable to this time. I remember that one of their traditions were they used to practice marriage inside the clan. Hinata took note of this as the Hyuga pretty much did the same before during her father's youth. That was, until her father married her mother. Their clan just dwindled by the numbers and they had no idea why. They were never involved with the wars that occurred before and after the establishment of Konoha or the other nations. But there was a rumor that involved those that marry outside the clan were stripped of their rights and were sent to live in the village, amongst the people around here. The old lady laughed at that. Of course, they would be cast away here in secret and the knowledge of the clan effectively removed from them. Oh, but those are old wives' tales. There are plenty of stories like that, but none of them had been proven true. If it were, then the Iwagami were very thorough in keeping many of their traditions a secret. Hinata then bit her lower lip as she asked one more question. Is there any chance that I can learn about the Iwagami clan more thoroughly and not just stories passed around? I apologize for my rudeness. The old lady gave a shrug. That place hasn't been looted ever since the last of the Iwagami died. I would think that the outpost outside of the village has something to do with that. They certainly kept bandits out of this small village and were thankful of them. I would like to think that the clan had them, but no one has seen even a parcel of paper inside that castle. The only other place worthy of note aside from that empty structure is the shrine just around the small mountain behind the castle. Hinata gave a nod of appreciation as the old lady also mentioned with a smile, there are also some scenic places there. A small lake and a waterfall. Maybe if you're troubled, you can clear your mind there to relax. Hinata gave a smile. I appreciate your recommendations. I will definitely see to it if I have some trouble. With that, the Hyuga went around the small village to keep asking about the empty castle, and the answers she got were all the same. With nothing to go for it, Hinata decided to search the castle herself. When she entered the gates, she could tell that the structure was showing its age. There had been no one to maintain the building and was slowly being run down. She could notice the age and some of the floorboards were also starting to splint. She activated her Byakugan just to be safe and noticed just about the same as what the guard at the outpost was talking about. There was nothing. Not a single trace of paper was ever seen, not a book or even anything that she could remotely tell that the house had been occupied. It seemed like the clan hauled everything in its possession and placed it somewhere else. It was oddly very empty to her liking and decided to abandon in exploring the castle altogether. There was nothing worth looking for in the empty castle. Coming up with nothing, Hinata decided to leave the slowly collapsing structure and tried to think of anything that could help her find a clue. She went to the place where the First Lady had asked her to clear her mind and relax, towards the lake near the waterfall. With Naruto and Jiraiya. Naruto had arrived in town earlier in the morning and had been outfitted by the tailor just a few hours ago. Jiraiya had asked him to remain put into this small clearing in the river to let him do his little experiment while the old hermit tried to meet one of his contacts. Seeing as this was a relatively obscure little town with almost very little to offer but food and clothing, the blonde found it hard to see why an outpost from Konoha was placed here, and one coming from the Hyuga at that. Already from the distance he noticed that the outpost here was much bigger than most that he had seen around the country, and he was not surprised why the town was pleasantly quiet and slow-paced. Or old-fashioned for that matter. It would certainly be good for a vacationing destination, one of those, to get away from it all. Things, but this town would drive him up the wall if he stayed here for more than a week or a month. Being the rebel that he was, Naruto merely shrugged his stay at the town and decided to disobey Jiraiya again and began experimenting with his newest creation. He honestly cared for Jiraiya's appraisal, but the man couldn't be bothered for now if he was doing an important job for Konoha. So Naruto didn't waste any time in creating his sealing matrix and applying it to the board. Thinking that he didn't want to get his new clothes wet, Naruto decided to strip down to his boxers and remove his sandals before he went to the board. When he stepped on the board, he began to pump chakra into the seal with his right foot directly to the core of the seal. The writing around it glowed and Naruto grinned that the first phase was a success. His feet clung to the board with chakra by principle of the tree walking exercise, and the board gave a low hum indicating that the jutsu was in effect. He slightly nudged his left leg forward and the board slowly crossed one side of the river to the other with relatively no problems. The blonde went back the same way and continued to perform the same maneuver several times before he went back to his side of the river and grew bored of it. Deciding to pump a little more chakra to his new toy, Naruto suddenly felt a powerful pulling force that he leaned back from the sheer savagery of it all, that it left a streak of water behind him and became a streak of yellow, green and black. WOOOOOOSSSSSHHHHH. Ah, was all Naruto could say before his now dangerous toy roared and screeched to life from the seal and sped up more, leaving a large body of water rising from both his sides before splashing back down to the shores of the river. WOOOOOOSSSSSSSSHHHH. Regaining his balance, Naruto leaned forward to try and see where he was headed and see if he could stop his movement just in time. He shifted his weight on the board slightly and it made a sharp U-turn on the river before he could assess where he was and noticed that the river water was now flowing rapidly. Naruto's eyes turned to pinpricks as he was too late to analyze his location properly before he looked back and heard the crashing of waters down below. Naruto, now riding against the current, decided to pump more chakra onto his board but found it unresponsive. Now you chose the time to be unresponsive. Naruto yelled in his grief as he was suddenly swept away by the current and into the waterfall. Ah shit. With Hinata. The townspeople were right. This place was beautiful, as pristine as many of Konoha's clean rivers and lakes. The beauty of the scenery couldn't simply be put to words. There was simply a certain kind of peace that made her calm. When frustration had made its way to her once more, she felt her own shortcomings and was reminded of her inability to perfect her technique. It seemed that the wall that she had been trying to overcome has been encroaching on her in a different aspect of her life. Father, what is it that you want me to know? She asked herself as she sat down, under the shade of a tree near the waterfall. Thoughts of her unanswered questions made its way as she sat down. Maybe she will never discover the scrolls at her mother's birthplace. There was simply nothing in that castle. She thought about just training near the outpost and visiting the shrine just behind her mother's former home to pray for the departed there, knowing that the blood of their clan still remains within her. She gave a sigh as she looked up, the wind gently blowing as the leaves rustled with each other. The rays of the sun appearing and reappearing as gaps were filled and then opened from the canopy of leaves above. Then, Hinata heard some shouting above the waterfall and she stood up, prepared to for just about anything, and saw a figure plummeting to the waters below and making a big splash. Silence followed as Hinata was just about to assess the person's vitals, then a head of blonde hair jumped from the depths of the lake's waters in all his naked glory with a big splash that Hinata would forever remember in her mind. There was Naruto, now standing on water, with nothing but his boxers and his necklace and holding a board, looking up at the waterfall, completely drenched from head to toe. Hinata's perception of time seemed to slow down as her eyes made sure to travel to Naruto's body from head to toe and memorized every inch of it. Her face soon lit up to a certain shade of red that her nose let out a small trickle of blood. Naruto-kun. Finally, she voiced out. Naruto looked at her as if confused when he saw Hinata there. Hinata's breathing turned heavy as she saw the rippling and developing muscle tone of her crush hardening to when he turned around to look at her and wet from the clear water of the lake. It was then that she had her nose freely bleeding and her vision began to feel woozy. Hinata. Hinata had promptly fainted all the while, muttering with a smile on her face, "I'm not ready for this." Hinata. When she woke up, she was in an unfamiliar scenery. Immediately, she was already on alert as she righted herself only to see the blonde putting on his green flak jacket over his orange shirt with long black sleeves. Ah, Hinata, sorry, I had to carry you all the way here when you were knocked out. I might have surprised you back there for a moment. Yes, he certainly did. Naruto scratched the back of his head in embarrassment. Sorry about that, I almost went full frontal on you because I thought the whole place wouldn't be filled with people. So sorry for the display, okay. I think that you'd feel pretty violated from seeing me there with only my underwear. No, she most definitely didn't. The memory of Naruto's body certainly was more of a sight to see to her than anything else. Her face turned to an interesting shade of red at that thought and vehemently shook her head as a blush escaped her cheeks. Well, this is awkward. Naruto looked down and laughed nervously, trying to defuse the situation was always hard on him. He had never been much of a person aware of social cues. Deciding to change the subject, Naruto asked Hinata, I never expected you to be here. Hinata, do you have a mission here? Hinata gave a nod and answered, I'm here to learn more about my mother. The locals said the Iwagami clan had been as old as the first records of ninjutsu had been. They said they were historians who chronicled the times even as far back as the Rakuto Sennin's brother. A fascinating story, I must say. Asura had commented inside Naruto as the blonde turned his attention to him. Your dad had a brother? Naruto asked. Hamura was the older brother, but unlike my father, Hamura Jii-san possessed the Byakugan, an entirely separate dojutsu from what I have come to understand thus far. Even my father does not talk about his brother too much, but they were much more civil than I was with mine. Hagoromo and Hamura merely had a disagreement of ideas and not much else. That was their only fight as siblings, and it involved no use of chakra. Whereas the old man taught about ninshu, Hamura opposed such a value and thought that humans would find ways to twist Hagoromo's teachings and use them for selfish reasons. He was mostly right. Naruto-kun, Hinata had asked worriedly. It was because for a while that she had known Naruto. Whenever he paused for a moment, he was thinking deeply, as if he was having conversations with himself. Naruto immediately turned his attention to Hinata and smiled. Don't worry, just thinking about what you said. So, have you found anything? Hinata looked down and shook her head. The castle is barren, there is nothing there of value. I've checked with my Byakugan, there are no seals to see nor are there hidden paths to be found. I had mostly used my eyes to search the place, but it was dangerous as the castle is decrepit. There was no one to keep it in check and it could come crashing down at any moment. Hinata then removed her sandals and soaked her feet in the river. I would have liked to find out more about Mother, but the challenge is much harder than I would have thought. Not when even a single trace of the Iwagami clan can be found anywhere. This is all there is to it, and that castle is all that remains as the proof of their existence. Naruto remained silent for a second and went behind Hinata as he rested his hands on her shoulders. Hey, remember our Nindo? Hinata gave a nod. Never take our words back. Naruto gave a smile. Right. And you're like me. You never give up, Hinata. And for that, you're stronger than most people. You know your own strength better than others. It's why you can overcome this. I've had faith in you ever since I've known you. Hinata then turned around to him and looked at him in the eyes, her confidence building up from Naruto's words. Words that she desperately needed to hear. I'm like you too. I'm trying to learn my mother's skills when she was alive. She was pretty good at fuinjutsu, which is why I'm training to learn it as a tribute to her and my dad. It's harder than most of anything I've learned, yet I'm still trying. So keep trying, Hinata. I'm not about to give up on you now, so you shouldn't give up on yourself. I'll be here with you all the way. Then, should we go to the shrine together for today? Hinata asked. Naruto raised an eyebrow at her. Shrine? He asked. The one at the back of the castle. I was thinking about going there after I went to the castle. We shouldn't be that far and away from there. Hinata replied, and Naruto thought about it for a while before he gave a nod. Hold on. I better leave a note to Ero Sennin before he gets worried that I'm not in camp. Naruto then followed Hinata as they both scaled a flight of stairs with multiple red gates that allowed them entry towards the temple in the summit. By the time that they made it, it was near sundown, and Naruto could just picture out the image of the shrine itself into his head. To his furthest front stood a small temple, its doors closed off from everyone. Inside, he could make out a small statue of four beasts looking up into the sky. It was made from jade and some more likely expensive mineral. But Naruto could tell the intricacy of the statue was still pretty high level. Near him, there was a similar statue, placed on a stone dais. It looked like the four animals were looking up to the heavens with a jade moon at the center. To the right of the jade moon coiled a dragon ascending heavenward. Its mighty claws and opened jaws seemed intimidating even for him. Just in front of it stood a phoenix, wings outstretched and seemingly caught in flames. The glistening stones made it look like the embers under the phoenix's wings were real. It was nearly awe-inspiring to look at. Opposite of the phoenix was a tortoise. Its head outstretched looking out from his shell. It stood the lowest of the four with its mouth open as that of the dragon. It decidedly looked proud as it looked up, even more so than the regal animal to the left of the jade moon. The tiger stood with its fearsome look, roaring above the rock that it stood on. Naruto could almost feel the tremble in the wind as if the tiger himself was alive and roaring loudly. Peculiarly, he saw something by the side of the statue that made him look into. A strange but expectantly habit that he picked up during his fuinjutsu studying was looking into intricacies of one object, particularly in designing a seal matrix. He had been doing a whole lot of exercises on his own or with Jiraiya's help for nearly 2 years, and he picked up many of the habits that Jiraiya had when examining seals. Hey Hinata, Naruto called the attention of girlfriend, who was looking at the architecture of the whole temple. To her, the humble temple felt like a serene and solemn place. The other half of her ancestors surely had made their mark here. When she heard Naruto calling out to her, Hinata's musings were cut short when he asked her to look into something Naruto had found. She went to Naruto's place and looked into what he was looking at. There are some letters written at the base of the tortoise, Hinata. I think this might be a sealing matrix. Naruto traced the peculiar lines with the tip of his fingertips and went further down. The one drawn on the dais and the statue were familiar writing techniques to him. It really was a sealing matrix. Excitedly, Naruto reached down and traced the sealing matrix in its faded or eroded glory until it reached towards halfway to the main shrine itself where the other statue was, exactly in the middle of an intersecting pathway. Naruto and Hinata raised an eyebrow at this. What do you think the seal is, Naruto-kun? Naruto replied, it's just one part of the matrix, but from what I can gather, this seems like a seal meant to hide something or prevent someone from entering. Entering? From what? Hinata asked as she activated her Byakugan. She widened her eyes as she finally saw the intricate sealing pattern placed all around the temple. The seal would have been discovered by a Hyuga eventually, but she never thought about the seal being hidden in plain sight. This whole place is laden with fuinjutsu seals. The writings may be wiped out, but the chakra remains. There's a lot of it here. Naruto hummed as Hinata approached towards the intersecting stone pathways and the seal itself reacted and made visible to normal eyesight. Naruto traced every line and saw every core as they all interconnected directly to where Hinata was standing. From what I can remember, these are seals made by the Uzumaki clan, Naruto thought as he saw many of the old sealing cores that the Uzumaki had created during ancient times. They were written in the scrolls from which Jiraiya had given him as examples of fine craftsmanship of the Uzumaki's sealing methods. The complex writing laden around the temple finally stopped glowing, but the written seals on the ground remained as if they were revived with their black ink returned. Naruto gave a serious look as he touched the seal matrix from the entrance of the shrine. Just what are you? Somewhere in Fire Country. Kiba grumbled as he looked at his front. He had never expected that he would have company on his trip. By some horrible coincidence, he ended up on the road with Uchiha Sasuke heading in the same direction as him. He and Sasuke might be civil to one another, but the Uchiha would be the last person that he would go with considering how antagonistic and a dick outright for most of the time that they crossed paths. Your grumbling is annoying, Kiba. Believe me, it annoys me too that we are apparently heading in the same direction and I would like nothing more than having nothing to do with you, but I need to go to one of my warehouses to see some notes about a certain topic. Kiba raised an eyebrow at this, and this isn't in a more secured place like Konoha, why exactly? Akamaru barked with agreement to his master's question. Kiba's dog now reaching just below his waist. The puppy that he once knew now stood majestically huge beside him. Sasuke gave a small huff as he went ahead with an annoyed tone to his voice. Hideouts are meant to be like that, dog boy. Of course it's going to be completely fucking safe. Kiba's left eyebrow twitched, but you said your place was a warehouse. I did. Sasuke answered with a nod. Another twitch, this time Kiba felt like grinding his teeth. You could have mentioned that particular detail about your fucking warehouse, dickhead. Kiba replied pointed to Sasuke while Akamaru drooped his ears down due to Kiba's loud voice. Warehouses and hideouts aren't mutually exclusive, moron. Sasuke replied casually as they walked towards the east. Being asked to do this rite of passage ritual thing was something he didn't fully understand with his mother. But Kiba was much more concerned about his mother smacking him on the back of his head before tossing him over to the kennels to sleep for several nights, so he decided to just obey his mom as she had explained that it was part of their tradition. Now he had to endure half of his trip on the way there because he ended up with the asshole that had the sensitivity of a rock. Talk about the absolute opposite of Naruto's extremely lucky disposition. Go fuck yourself, Sasuke. Likewise, kibble breath. At least the dobi is tolerable compared to your dog piss odor. Sasuke replied rather offhandedly that Kiba growled at that. I do not smell like dog piss. Kiba expected another comeback from Sasuke but he remained silent as if he did not believe one word of it coming from the Inuzuka. I really don't. If it could get any more frustrating, Kiba could swear he was going to flip out and just tell his mom he finished the damn ritual already. Now that Kiba thought about it, he could have trained in some place and come back home after several days and just lie about the whole thing. Sasuke stopped in front of him, forcing him to stop as well and look forward. There, He saw an abandoned city way up front just beyond a cliff with a small tunnel entrance from a bunker just near them. You can stop following me now and head to whatever place you were going to, Kiba. If you haven't noticed, this is my clan's hideout. Sasuke said to his tag-along as he pointed at the entrance of the hideout with his thumb and subtly telling him to take a hike. Far ahead, Kiba noticed something that made his eyes narrow and decrease at the size of pinpricks. Countless number of cats just standing by the branches of trees and above the bunker itself, all sitting down and looking at them with unblinking eyes. Cats. Really? Kiba asked. Akamaru gave a bark as if he too was getting at the edge of his patience. The dog beside him now growled. Sasuke could only grin a little as he walked forward. Deciding to try and heed Kiba's advice, he turned around and stopped when he saw the cats surrounded him and Akamaru, and all of them were eerily staring at the duo down with their glowing eyes. Akamaru chose the perfect time not to growl and instead looked a bit scared. Without further ado, Kiba made the most sensible decision at the time and took a step back before he went after Sasuke, with Akamaru following suit. Sasuke, wait up, Azumo. Jiraiya was not much of a worrywart. He was careful, but he wasn't paranoid most of the time. A trait that was strange for someone who holds a large information network that spans the entire continent, surely. He had been doing this for more than a decade, even before his godson was born. He certainly didn't fit the bill of being a spy. He was magnanimous, a complete show-off, he had a penchant for the theatrics. His behavior was really the opposite of what was an accepted and fairly understandable behavior of spies. But of course, Jiraiya wasn't just someone for show. He wasn't a member of the Sannin for nothing, having forced the great Sanshou no Hanzo to a standstill along with his teammates. He had a track record that most shinobi could only dream of. Although said to be Hiruzen's most problematic student, Jiraiya himself was a late bloomer and really manifested his potential on the latter half of his adolescence alongside fellow geniuses like Orochimaru and Tsunade. Perhaps he was even quicker to pick up lessons than his teammates. He was not stupid, he could pick up quick when something was wrong, and he got a distressing message as he made contact with one of his spies. Apparently, Earth Country had been procuring services from Akatsuki. He picked it up through one of his informants stationed in Lightning Country. It seemed that Kumo couldn't be bothered with dealing with such dubious means, as they were still in the midst of their military upgrades, even though the trend seems to be slowly trickling down. Both of these nations don't know how pressing the matter is. They couldn't be asked to mobilize their units and hunt down a mercenary group until something happens. What complete short-sighted fools. Especially when that old fogey, Onoki, still has Iwa under his rule. It's a disgrace to his supposed wisdom. Akatsuki now had Iwa for the most part, even though Onoki still rules the country. If both of their Jinchuriki vanish, the rest of the villages will be smelling blood, and Onoki would be in a desperate battle against the surrounding countries, hostile and even friendlies. Kumo couldn't be arsed to do a damn thing unless it involved something really personal with the Raikage. And unless the younger brother isn't touched in any way, shape or form, I would not lift a finger. Jiraiya massaged his temples at this as he made his way back to camp. He had not seen Naruto when he returned, but he did left a note in the tent saying that he was off to the temple at the top of the hill to check something out. Seeing as the village was out of the way to any major establishments and relatively safe, Jiraiya had to let it go in favor of performing a summoning jutsu. In a cloud of smoke, there appeared two elderly small toads wearing cloaks billowing in the wind. Jiraiya noted the familiar faces of his teachers, Fukasaku and Shima, and both of them looked bewildered as Jiraiya had summoned them and noticed that he was not in battle. "What brings you to summon us, Jiraiya-chan?" asked the elderly lady toad, Shima. "I finally found the child of prophecy." Jiraiya answered shortly and in the best way he possibly can without spilling them with too much information. Fukasaku seemed skeptical at this. "How sure are you, my boy?" he asked. Jiraiya had told them twice about finding the so-called child of prophecy. First it was an orphan from Aim who they had heard died an untimely death at the hands of the fearsome Hanzo, and then, one of their former summoners, Minato, who also died early in defense of the village against the Kyuubi. At this point, Fukasaku would have likened the title to a curse for Jiraiya. "Hear me out and you can ask questions later, Fukasaku-sensei. What I'm about to say is something that is beyond our wildest dreams." And so Jiraiya's tale began, how throughout the whole trip, Naruto had absorbed his lessons from simple jutsu mechanics in his wind element to advanced sealing theories in fuinjutsu. The boy had an uncanny amount of intelligence from his supposed idiotic label. Jiraiya told them of the harrowing journey Naruto had when he was imprisoned in some underground facility supposedly built by Danzo, and the revelation that Naruto is indeed the reincarnation of Otsuki Asura, the second son and inheritor of the will of the Sage of Six Paths. Fukasaku and Shima had their jaws wide open upon hearing that. To have awakened the soul of the second son blessed with the sacred powers of Senjutsu itself, they were gobsmacked. Asura lives on in that boy, the one who has inherited his soul. Jiraiya-chan, we need Naruto-chan on Myobokuzen as soon as possible. Shima responded as she hopped towards Jiraiya. Indeed. It is imperative that he learns of Senjutsu as soon as possible. We are in the age of a great upheaval. If you want to see the end of this age into a new one, we must train him at once. Jiraiya gave a nod. I already am. Naruto has been gaining progress in the first stages of Senjutsu. He's learning quickly and he's making progress faster than I had anticipated. We will be going to Myobokuzen within a month as fulfillment to my requirements in his first year of training. Will a month be too long, lovely wife? Fukasaku asked, and Shima let a grunt escape her lips while a blush escaped her cheeks. You flatter me so, dear husband. But a month will be enough. He needs his eyes to be open once he starts his training. How long are we going to train him? Jiraiya asked, and the two toads looked at each other then nodded before looking back at Jiraiya. As long as it takes. Jiraiya scratched the back of his head. Well, a year of not being seen by the entire continent would be nice to be under the radar. But I'll need to update my network every month or so. Besides, you two are better suited for training Naruto. Train me for what? The familiar voice brought the trio out of their confusion as they saw Naruto walking towards them with Hinata beside him. Jiraiya raised an amused eyebrow at this. We were talking about taking your training on Myobokuzen for as long as it takes for your second year. The question remains on how long you'll be there. It'll definitely be hard on you, seeing as Senjutsu is an art that so few people can learn unless they are made for it. Senjutsu. Hinata asked, looking bewildered at Naruto and then to Jiraiya's company, that was apparently a pair of elderly toads. Yes, girl. Senjutsu is the art of gathering chakra in nature and enhancing yourself to the point that you become a being that is above human. It is a sacred art passed down to those who are worthy of it, traced back to the time of the great sage himself and passed down to his youngest son. Hinata looked at Naruto in wonder for a second and the blonde scratched the back of his head. Can we discuss this later? I think I found something that might interest you, Ero Sennin. The older man raised an eyebrow once more at his apprentice as the boy flipped through the pages of his small notebook and gave it to him. It did interest him. These are complex sealing arrays. Old ones too. The design is notable from one of the seals commonly used by the Uzumaki clan several hundred years ago. But you can tell there's a modification here and there. I noticed the familiarity near the core and it looks like one of the seals made more than a half a century ago. I can figure that the main sealing core is much more recent than the rest of the seal, but it requires a specific condition to be activated. Naruto gave a nod. It's a seal meant for those who have the blood of the clan that once lived here. The question remains on what it does. Jiraiya gave an answer as he, Fukasaku and Shima looked at the notes together. It's simple, really, and it is a gateway seal. It's like one of those things that keep people out in a certain place and might possibly contain all the family scrolls that this clan had concerning its secrets. You never encounter this often, seeing as time-space seals are rare and we haven't discussed much concerning the topic. Considering it reacted when your girlfriend stepped on the seal, it recognized immediately that she is a member of that clan. But why didn't it activate immediately? Naruto asked and Jiraiya replied with a grin. In the same manner as opening a lock, you need to turn the key to open it. Your girlfriend is the key, but she must know the sequence to activate it. It could be by hand signs or it could be with her blood. Fukasaku quipped. Preferably enough to cross the circle, I think. Shima added. Jiraiya gave a nod and then said to the boy, I would advise not to tamper with it so early on. We don't know what is in there to begin with. If you want to mess with it here, you will have to take me along to see the seal myself. That is, of course, if your girlfriend there will allow it. Hinata blushed at the moment that she was labeled as Naruto's girlfriend before she answered, I have to inform my guards and my sister first. This is something that needs to be seen by them. Jiraiya gave a nod as he then looked at Naruto. As for you, we'll be here for only a month. You need to finish any of your pet projects here before going there. Seeing as it was slowly getting dark, Naruto had escorted Hinata back to the outpost without much problem and went back towards the campsite. Hinata, for her part, asked for Hanabi, Ko and Natsu to come with her to the shrine the next day as the legendary Jonin and his apprentice had stumbled upon a seal that many of them had overlooked. Surprised by these turn of events, Hinata's group had readily agreed to witness what happens tomorrow. For now, they had to take a rest and conserve their energy tomorrow. Hinata, for her part, had eagerly slipped into sleep after a tiring day. She knew tomorrow would be something different for her. The next day, Jiraiya and Naruto had arrived at the shrine first and began looking at the areas where Naruto remembered where the matrix ran through. Applying a bit of chakra, they could see a little of the matrix glowing again before fading as they remembered each line and letter that was engraved in the ground with chakra. Its luminous and incandescent light was brief, but it somehow etched in the mind of one Fuinjutsu master and his prodigious apprentice. Yeah, this is the real deal, all right. Good thing your mother was thorough in her work in seals as much as your father was. I can definitely see her work here. Forceful, overwhelming, yet precise and accurate. Fuinjutsu was, of course, an art. Both of them understood that no sealing process could ever be identical for different people as methods differ for each of them. It was a paradox of the art. They learn of what is and isn't workable, yet it was malleable enough to basically do anything that they want a seal to be. Each seal made by a master had a specific style, a specific method and procedure done. That was not always the case, as multiple sealing masters can come together and make elaborate seals for faster and more effective usage. But for a single master to do a complex seal, there were signatures that created certain distinctions. So Mom actually made this? Naruto asked, intrigued since the evening before about finding out that the seal was a work of his mother's. Jiraiya shook his head, more like she plastered one over another and restructured some of the old ones. I have to admit, your mother is a genius on these seals. This is the kind of mastery that even legends would be jealous of. To have the ability to link to a relatively old and ancient seal with her methods is nothing short of complete brilliance. There were problems concerning such seals, and more often than not, older seals tend to be more rigid and non-compliant to newer designed ones. They always had problems of linking, and it was why some seal masters chose to just rewrite the whole matrix rather than add one more and increasing their chances in failure, which was why to have linked such an ancient seal with a new one was an astonishing feat. Naruto also knew this, and every time he ran his hands through the letters, he felt like he was knowing a part of his mother, and it made him grin from ear to ear at the thought. His mom was totally kick-ass. When Hinata and her group arrived, the duo had looked at them and told Hinata to once more get in the middle while Naruto and Jiraiya applied chakra to the matrix. Instead of going to the more archaic lines of the matrix, Naruto positioned his hand to the more familiar letters and lines, knowing fully well that it was his mother who made them. The seals glowed a majestic blue as Jiraiya said to the eldest Hyuga sibling, "Now, smear your blood on the circle's center and we'll see what happens." Hinata complied, grabbing a kunai and cutting her hand lightly as she let some of her blood smear the ground while Hanabi and the two caretakers looked on in wonder as Jiraiya had instructed the blonde on what to do. Now, sync your hand seals with mine, Naruto. Dog. Bird. Dragon. Boar. Tiger. Jiraiya had noted to the blonde that this was the standard sealing procedure in stabilizing seals of this magnitude. They would have performed this in order to make sure that the seal wouldn't backfire at any given moment. It pays to help to be extra careful, as Jiraiya said to Naruto. A column of light escaped from the shrine behind Naruto as the eyes on all the statues of the four beasts shined in blue, reflecting the color of the skies above, and the shrine shimmered from its view. A way to the secrets of the Iwagami clan, and an Uzumaki has been one of the responsible people to have hidden it away from many people. Ko muttered under his breath, and yet, his statement begs the question as to why it had to happen. Then, a voice thundered from behind the shrine that served as the door to the other side. It was loud, echoic, and reeked of a regal tone, proud and full of confidence. O descendant of the older brother who was born of the goddess, his chakra lives inside you. To have been awakened in this time is a time of great upheaval. If you wish to know of your legacy, then come and test your mettle. For nothing is greater than proving your worth as the carrier of the blood of Otsuki. To this, Naruto and Jiraiya had stopped when they heard the name of Otsuki. Hamura Oji-sama's legacy. Asura spoke from inside Naruto as he looked upwards and saw Kurama looking quite unsure of himself as well. I have not heard of this in the centuries I have been here. This is the first time I have heard of the elder brother's legacy in this world. And then, Hinata, as if mesmerized by the call of the voice, reached out her hand and walked towards the shrine, shimmering and waning before she was swallowed whole. Hinata Oni-sama. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.